Chapter 31. Chapter 31. The Punisher. At night. Manhattan under the moonlight. A man in a black windbreaker walked the streets of Hell's Kitchen. The man's brows were deeply wrinkled, and his expression somber as his eyes swept the surrounding streets from time to time. Just then, there was the sudden sound of heavy gunfire in the distance and a loud scream. With the screams, a large and panicked crowd appeared in the middle of the street. Facing the crowd running head-on, the man's gaze flickered. Then he collected the look of grief on his face and quickened his pace toward where the sound of gunfire had erupted. He kept his head down and dodged the stray bullet. There was no sign of emotion on Frank's face, despite the fierce counterattack presented by the Savage Gang. Raising a hand to finish off one of the armed gang members across the street, Frank lowered his burly body and expertly dodged a sweeping barrage of shots. The Savage Gang's firepower was somewhat higher than he expected. Under the intense barrage of gunfire, even Frank, a veteran with extensive combat experience, struggled for a while. In short, years of combat experience not only enriched his combat capability but also gave him plenty of patience. Therefore, even if he was at a disadvantage, Frank could still maintain his pace in battle, constantly using various means to wear down the opposite Savage Gang's men. Gleek, gleek, gleek. Dodging another flying bullet, Frank pulled the trigger, only to hear the empty clicking of the Browning high-power in his hand. His brows instantly furrowed, yet he dropped the gun in his hand on the spot. Under the circumstances, a pistol without bullets was no different from a piece of scrap metal. He's out of bullets. On the other side, the Savage Gang noticed Frank's action. Haha, let's see how he escapes this time. You're a dead madman now. I'm gonna shoot him full of holes. Across the street, the Savage Gang's shouting didn't have any effect on Frank. As a veteran who had experienced real battlefields and witnessed brutal wars, this level of provocation was childish to Frank. With one hand, he took off the last grenade from his bulletproof vest and threw it over. Boom. Ignoring the wreckage flying in all directions from the huge explosion in front of him, Frank reached out and ripped a submachine gun from the hands of a mangled corpse and coldly said, "Seems like I found some more bullets. Bastard, go to." At the edge of the blast, a bloodied member of the Savage Gang staggered to his feet. The shock of the blast had left his brain in a state of confusion. He lowered his head and scanned the bodies spread around him, many of which were familiar faces. It made the survivor subconsciously raise the submachine gun in his arms and shout toward Frank. Bang! However, without waiting for him to carry out his revenge, a flying bullet ended his actions from a distance. Frank looked at the collapsed body in front of him, but his expression didn't relax. The bullet that killed the guy didn't come from his gun. Turning his head and staring at a shadowy corner, Frank asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" The short silence didn't make Frank lower his guard. On the contrary, he raised the submachine gun in his hand and repeated, still with the same expression, "Who are you?" "A passerby." Ha! However, to Frank's surprise, the sound came from behind him. Reputation points from Frank Castle plus 20. Frank quickly turned around. He saw a man in a black trench coat with a brooding expression stepping out of the shadows. Having said that, everyone should understand it by now. That's right. The man in the trench coat with an expression that looked like the world owed him was none other than Ryan. Of course, his identity at the moment should be Wesley Gibson, a member of the legendary mysterious organization, the Brotherhood. Do you think I'll take your word for it? Staring at the man who suddenly arrived in front of him, Frank's expression looked stony. He was quite confident in his own judgment. He had clearly determined the location of his opponent's hiding place by the direction of the bullet trajectory before, but he never expected a huge deviation. Such a mistake would definitely be fatal if it occurred on the battlefield. All right. Faced with Frank's distrustful reaction, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of Ryan's lips, and a deeper and more somber look crossed his face. "I admit, this time, it was for you." "So, you're someone they hired?" Hearing the reply from the other man, Frank didn't hesitate to raise his submachine gun and fire. Shit! Are you kidding me? Faced with the onslaught of machine gun fire, even though he had a premonition in his heart, Ryan was still surprised by the cruel character of the Punisher, who would strike without saying anything. Sure enough, as expected of the grumpy old man of the Marvel world, he shot at the drop of a hat. Even surprised, on the surface, Ryan still looked calm. With his super dynamic vision and fast reflexes from his adrenaline acceleration skill, he easily dodged the bullets in front of him while taking out his own gun and firing a shot at Frank. In the face of Ryan's countershot, Frank remained the same, and even his position didn't change. According to his judgment, it was impossible for the bullet to hit his body. However, Frank obviously forgot the previous scene. The bullet, which he thought couldn't hit him, suddenly turned, correcting its flight path and instantly becoming a lethal attack from a previously harmless shot. Reputation points from Frank Castle plus 75. In a life-or-death moment, the instinct from a soldier saved Frank. He made a split-second decision and didn't choose to dodge, but decided to receive the shot with his chest. With a dull thud, the impact of the bullet made Frank subconsciously grimace, but his bulletproof vest managed to shield him from a fatal blow. "Who the hell are you?" After seeing Ryan's magical curved ballistics, Frank didn't get carried away by anger and chose to retaliate. Although some of Frank's behaviors were bloody and violent, it didn't mean that he only used violence to solve problems. Brutality was what he used to fight crime. In fact, while being an experienced specialist in unconventional combat, he was equally an expert in military engineering, familiar with conventional medical and battlefield rescue skills. If it weren't for the incident that killed his family, Frank wouldn't have chosen to fight against the evil forces in Hell's Kitchen in this way. Feeling a vague painful impact in his chest, Frank looked straight at Ryan. He didn't think that the Savage Gang was capable of hiring a helper with powerful means to deal with him. If the Savage Gang had that kind of power, they wouldn't have been in the state they were in now. Chapter 32. Chapter 32. Solicitation. Sure enough, the best way to calm the grumpy old man down was to fight. Right now, Frank's scornful attitude showed that there were times when actions really did speak louder than words. Of course, this may also be related to the character of the Punisher. This was Frank's vengeful attitude toward the evil forces after his family's misfortune. "First of all, you can relax." Ryan lowered his gun but didn't put the weapon away. After all, with the previous experience, who knows if Frank would suddenly shoot him in the face again? "I have no connection with the so-called Savage Gang you're talking about, nor do I have the slightest intention to take revenge for them. The reason I'm here, like I said before, is purely because of you." "Me?" Raising his eyebrows slightly, Frank replied back with his expression still unchanged. "I don't think I have anything to talk about with a stranger who suddenly appears out of nowhere." "No really, Frank Castle?" When Ryan clearly pronounced his name, Frank's eyes slightly moved, but he immediately turned back to his indifferent attitude. He didn't deliberately conceal information about himself because he had nothing left but vengeance since long ago. "You are a special being." The low voice was unexpectedly convincing when paired with Ryan's somber look at the moment, just short of saying, "I have some stories to tell." "You, like us, have a resolute goal of ending evil on our own terms, and in doing so, saving many more innocent people." "Us?" Frank keenly noticed the details in Ryan's words and immediately pursued, "And who are you guys?" Successfully getting Frank's attention, Ryan's heart fluttered. On the surface, however, he still had that somber look. "We're the Brotherhood." "The Brotherhood?" Reputation points from Frank Castle plus 20. Like Jessica, Frank had never heard of the organization, but as a combatant belonging to the U.S. military, he had been in contact with many similar organizations, so he didn't look all that surprised. Although it wasn't a surprise, it didn't mean that Frank wasn't interested in Ryan's Brotherhood. "So, you want me to join your organization?" "No mistake about it." Nodding his head, Ryan continued to play the role of the leader of the Brotherhood. Although, in general, members of the Brotherhood screen or recruit assassins' apprentices through the organization, I believe that you, Frank, have ample possibilities to become a great assassin and therefore have deliberately recommended you to the Brotherhood's inner circle. As long as you declare yourself to the Brotherhood as an assassin who abides by the creed and undergo a period of testing to prove your worth. "So, I should thank you?" Frank sneered and tightened the grip on his submachine gun as he continued to condescend. "If the Brotherhood, as you call it, is so great and mysterious, why do you need me to join it?" "Because assassination is never the goal. Salvation is. I think you know that best, Frank." Oh. Ryan's words seemed to stir up some memories for the Punisher. He was silent for a moment before reining in the expression on his face and raised the submachine gun in his hand, and responded coldly. "Sorry, I'm used to working alone. And all this was never about saving because I've lost the most important people in my life that I should have saved." "Found him. That guy is still here." "Bastard, kill him. Do you need my help?" Ryan looked at the Savage Gang members who came over one after another and asked Frank. "No, I'm good enough on my own." Without hesitation, rejecting Ryan's show of goodwill, Frank turned around with his submachine gun in hand. While firing back at the arriving gang members, he spoke in that cold tone of his. "And don't let me find out that your Brotherhood has committed any crimes. If I find out, get ready for bloodshed. You can give it a try." Ryan wasn't the least bit worried about the Punisher's threats. After all, what crimes could an organization commit that didn't exist in the past? Raising his hand and taking care of an unsuspecting gang member, Ryan took one last deep look at Frank, who had resumed fighting behind him, before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Reputation points from Savage Gang member plus 0.05. Reputation points from Savage Gang member plus 0.03. Anthony is dead. In the middle of a glamorous party, Kingpin was laughing and joking with the bigwigs of New York City when Bullseye, dressed as a bodyguard, approached him and whispered the not-so-pleasant news. "Excuse me, I need to step away for a moment." With an apology to the other party, Kingpin went to the balcony of the party venue, looked at the lively party scene in front of him and turned to Bullseye, asking, "What's going on?" "The Savage Gang came under heavy fire. Anthony was shot dead, and we lost a lot of money to the opposing forces where the Savage Gang was based." "Who is it? The Russians? Or the cartel?" "Oh." Even though he held most of the forces of crime in New York City, it didn't mean that Kingpin didn't have any rivals. Not just annoying superheroes but members of many New York gangs who weren't necessarily under his authority. Bullseye shook his head. Neither. According to the survivors of the Savage Gang, it was all done by one person. Alone? The cigar in his hand lingered for a moment as Kingpin continued. "Is it Daredevil?" Recently, Daredevil had been haunting every corner of Hell's Kitchen, cracking down on crime and, of course, indirectly breaking a number of his businesses. No, the man who appeared this time did not wear a mask like Daredevil. He's been attacking with a great amount of firepower and calls himself the Punisher since the beginning. "Punisher, huh?" Shaking the ash from his cigar in his hand, Kingpin grunted rather disdainfully at the moniker. "Just a clown of a man who dares to call himself a Punisher. Let's get our men in Hell's Kitchen moving and get me that Punisher. Show him exactly how big a mistake he's made." Smiling at one of the guests at the party, Kingpin turned his head and coldly gave his orders. "By the way, any sign of Phantom Thief?" Immediately afterwards, Kingpin seemed to remember something. He then turned toward Bullseye and asked, "No, he's hiding very carefully. Although we found out through the NYPD that he had an encounter with Tony Stark, there's no way to know more than that in detail because of the restrictions on personnel statuses." Tony Stark? That famous brat? Kingpin was no stranger to Tony. He had even sourced a number of his weapons from Stark Industries. Hearing that the Phantom Thief he had been looking for was actually involved with the famous New York genius and playboy, Kingpin couldn't help but frown. It wasn't that he was afraid of Tony. It was purely because Stark Industries and the military were close. If Phantom Thief Kid were really involved with Tony, it would make things rather difficult for him. Continue to track down the Phantom Thief, and also get the details of his relationship with Tony Stark. Of course, just because things were difficult, it didn't mean that Kingpin would back away. Chapter 33. Bonus Chapter. Chapter 33. Harlem. "I guess I assumed too much." Frank gave him fewer reputation points than Ryan expected. This made Ryan realize that even if the guy was a superhero, different heroes could give him different amounts of points. There may be differences in the hero's own social status and influence, but Ryan felt it had more to do with the superhero's own personalities. After all, compared with Tony, who hadn't suffered setbacks yet, transforming into a true Iron Man, Frank, the Punisher who was a retired United States Marine and had suffered drastic changes, wasn't easily swayed because of his character or his experiences. The word detached may not be accurate, but it could also be used to describe Frank's inner world at this time. To a man whose heart was so full of vengeance that he had long forgotten about life and death, Ryan wouldn't be able to generate much of an impact on his psyche and, naturally, wouldn't be able to gain too many points. So, the failure of one plan didn't dampen Ryan's confidence too much. What's more, compared to the early days of the system in the past, when he was up early and working like a dog but only collected 1 or 2 reputation points, the profit from this meeting with Frank, if not as expected, was at least much better than that. Be reasonable, and don't be overly ambitious. Big shots like Tony Stark were, after all, only a minority. After comforting himself a little, Ryan immediately turned his attention to the next target. On his hand, the lower third page of the future-famous newspaper Daily Bugle was reporting a new and strange story about Harlem, Manhattan. The report said that several gang members claimed to have met the black version of the Terminator, and the other party was invulnerable, even if he wasn't wearing clothes. Manhattan. Harlem. New York's famous ghetto, which was also the largest black neighborhood in the United States, had been aggravated in recent years by the influx of Latino immigrants from Mexico, which intensified the internal conflicts in Harlem. At the same time, racial conflicts, gang warfare, drugs, crime and poverty continued to plague the area. "Hey, yellow-skinned dwarf. You shouldn't be here." Near the Harlem River, several wandering black men noticed a figure in a red sweatshirt passing by at the opposite junction and then opened their mouths to jeer. The figure stopped and looked at the loitering black men gathered in 2s and 3s not far away and rhetorically asked, "Are you talking to me? If it ain't you, Are there any other yellow runts here? In the face of the question, a thin-looking black man grinned back with a provocative gesture, full of discrimination, revealing his huge gaping teeth. Ha ha! In response, his friends, who were gathered around him, laughed along with him. Oh, so it wasn't a mistake. Seeing that, the figure shrugged and then shook his head as he walked toward them. What? You want to talk with us more about it? Lecture us, or something? Looking at the approaching figure in front of them, instead of showing any worry, they sounded more and more fierce. Hey, shorty, if you don't want to get hurt, get the hell out. Among the men, a bald, topless man, showing off his glistening muscles, stepped forward and blocked the figure's path. Otherwise, this won't end with a few words. Come on, Martin, don't spoil the fun. Things are just starting to get interesting. We're just having fun. That's right, Martin. Can't you stop doing that? At the sight of the scene, several people standing behind the bald Martin let out a sigh of disappointment. Don't waste time here, we're still going to Cottonmouth's later. Turning his head to his fellow gang members behind him, he explained that stopping the other man wasn't out of any kindness on his part, but purely because he didn't want to waste time. So, kid, count yourself lucky. Turning back, Martin looked at the figure that was barely above his chest and opened his mouth. Before he could say anything else, he felt a huge force slamming into his chest, and his whole body flew straight up. Martin! Fuck! The whole situation might not have registered with Martin yet, but standing behind him, his few friends saw the whole thing unfold. They clearly saw that the yellow-skinned shorty, who stood opposite Martin and was jeered at by them, merely lifted his foot and Martin, who weighed over 200 pounds, flew up as if he was a balloon. Bang! With a heavy thud on the ground, the few remaining black men seemed to snap back to their senses as they turned their heads to look at Martin, who had fallen to the ground, spitting blood. They hastily pulled out the knives and handguns from their pockets, and aimed them at the man in the red sweatshirt in front of them. The man's expression didn't change in the slightest when faced with the threat in front of him. Bang! Ah! Then, a brief burst of gunfire accompanied by punches and kicks was heard, and several black men who had been arrogant were seen falling to the ground. Only the skinny black man who had opened his mouth earlier to provoke him stood still. He looked at all his fallen and whining companions around him, gulped and threatened. Don't come any closer. We're Cottonmouth's men. Ask around. No one in all of Harlem would touch Cottonmouth. Got any money on you? Opening his mouth to interrupt the other man's threat, the man in the red sweatshirt suddenly spoke up and asked. Yes, yes. Although he wasn't sure why the other man suddenly asked that, he hastily nodded and took out some money from his own pocket. Only 25 bucks. Handing over the only cash he had left in his body to the man in the red sweatshirt and watching the other man tuck it away in his pocket in a dazzling manner, the black man couldn't help but blurt out, Are you fucking mugging me right now? In the past, they would always be the ones to rob people, relying on Cottonmouth's reputation. This was the first time someone would rob them and beat them so badly. Yup. Nodding down without hesitation, the man in the red sweatshirt glanced at the few people who had collapsed around him and then at the skinny black man in front of him. Remember, don't casually insult people. Casually lecturing the few people, the man in the red sweatshirt went back toward the direction where he came from and turned a corner. As the man left, Martin, who was lying on the ground, struggled to get up. Martin, you okay? Noticing the movement from behind him, the skinny black man turned around and struggled to help Martin up. Call in, tell Cottonmouth we've been attacked. Barely getting up from the ground, Martin felt a sharp pain in his chest. Looking in the direction the man had left, he gritted his teeth and turned to his accomplice, who was supporting him. Chapter 34. Chapter 34. Pop's Barber Shop. This should be the place. Stopping at the door of a slightly dated shop, Ryan gauged the barber shop in front of him, comparing his vague memories to the place. Hey kid, this isn't a place for someone of your skin color to be. A kind old black man in a straw hat walked past Ryan's back to the door of the barber shop. Although Harlem is a lot better than it used to be, there's still a high chance that an Asian like you could be mugged walking down the road, especially by punks who have nothing better to do. I've seen some. At that, Ryan couldn't help but nod back with the expression of someone who had been there. He did meet the punks the old man was talking about, but the end result was slightly different from what the other man was saying. Instead of the punks robbing him, he managed to rob the punks. Really now? The old man turned to look at Ryan, looking at the scruffy appearance of his sweatshirt and sneakers. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry that happened to you in Harlem. The old man obviously misunderstood something and comforted Ryan, but that's life, isn't it? You can't always have a smooth ride, and it's the occasional setback that makes you grateful when happiness comes your way. After a lecture full of chicken soup for the soul, the old man turned around and took out his keys to open the shop door. After a pause, he turned again and extended an invitation to Ryan, who was standing in the doorway of the shop. Well, son, come on in. Although I can't change what happened to you, I can at least change your hairstyle. And of course, free of charge. Although the contact wasn't what Ryan had expected, he naturally went along with the old man's invitation to step inside the barbershop since the other man had invited him. I don't normally cut hair for free, so at least in Pop's barbershop, you're already in the same league as Ollie and Jordan now. Pointing to the piece of paper taped to the wall, the old man turned his head to Ryan and joked. Looking in the direction of the old man's finger, Ryan saw a number of names like Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, and Richard Roundtree, all prominent figures among the black population, printed on the paper. After letting Ryan sit in front of the mirror in the barbershop, the old man turned around and pulled back the curtains and switched on the TV to the basketball game before walking up behind Ryan and checking out his long hair. Say, kid, what kind of haircut do you want? Just to be clear, I've cut countless people's hair, but this is the first time I've done it for an Asian. Sitting in the barbershop chair, Ryan suddenly felt a little uneasy when he heard the words of the old man. Although the face he was wearing now wasn't his own, if the haircut was bad, it would affect the image of his character. How about just a simple hair wash? Thinking about it, Ryan couldn't help but ask the old man carefully. Standing behind and silently looking at Ryan for a while, the old man suddenly clapped his hands and laughed out loud a few times, then shook his head. Haha, I was kidding. Trust Pop's handiwork. I will give you a cool haircut that will make all the girls swoon. Hearing the old man say that, Ryan's heart didn't ease but panicked a little more. Hey, Henry. Walking into the barbershop with his chessboard in hand, Bobby Fish, a regular customer with a goatee, looked up and looked at Ryan sitting in the shop, getting a haircut. While there were quite a few Asians in New York, it was still a rare thing to see one in Harlem. Especially a new face that had never been spotted before, and in a barbershop with such obviously black presence as Henry Hunt, Pop's place. This was because, in general, the different communities have their own areas of activity. Hey, Bobby. While holding scissors, cutting hair, and circling Ryan, the older man answered. Have you heard? Setting the board in his hand at the barbershop front entrance, near the window, Bobby then turned to Henry and asked. What? Martin and the others got their asses handed to them. In front of the mirror in the barbershop, Ryan raised an eyebrow when he heard this. If he remembered correctly, it looked like one of the black men he had beaten up earlier was called Martin. Really? Turning Ryan's chair and adjusting it to another direction to cut his hair conveniently, the old man named Henry shrugged his shoulders. He wasn't surprised. I already told Martin and the others they shouldn't go too far. Sooner or later, there will be consequences. Too bad they never listened to me. Times are different, Henry. You're getting old. Casually picking up a pawn, Bobby retorted. Rules never get old because rules are rules. It was obvious that the old man didn't agree with the idea. Well, you're always right, Henry. With a shrug, Bobby placed the pawn on the chessboard. That's because I've made enough mistakes in my life. Hey, Pop. A young Puerto Rican man walked into the barbershop. Chico, you're late. Looking up at the clock on the wall, Henry turned to the young man. Sorry, Pop. Go on, get changed. You are always so soft-hearted, Henry. I've been cruel for most of my life and even went to prison for it. Although it was only a passing conversation, Ryan still picked up on a little of the conversation between the two men in the barbershop. Obviously, the old man was also a man with a past. Pop, I need a... The barbershop owned by the old man was obviously a popular one, as it had clearly only opened in the morning and was already being frequented by a number of customers. Ryan was sitting in the barber's chair, looking at his hair getting shorter and shorter, when he heard a slightly noisy clatter from behind him. Then, a black man with a wobbly walk was seen coming over to Ryan, who was having his hair cut in Pop's hands, and looking at the guy in the chair who was very different from the people in the shop. Holy shit, this is how it is now? You actually let one in the barbershop. Shamik, you know the rules, no swearing in Pops. Hendry said as he pointed to the swear jar on the desk. I know, but Pop, isn't this too strange? A yellow Asian, cutting his hair in your shop. What's so strange about that, Shamik? It's been how many years since black people were liberated? A brother even became president. Why can't Pop's barbershop have Asians in it? Pop's right, Connie's Chinese restaurant is the best proof. Luke, you're late. Pop, you know, I haven't been getting enough sleep recently. Chapter 35. Chapter 35. Luke Cage. Luke? Luke Cage. In the barbershop, Ryan looked at the tall figure in the mirror. His heart was relieved. Finally, at least I didn't get my hair cut for nothing. Sleeping is no excuse. I also turned in late every day, but am always the first to come to the shop. Placing the scissors down, the old man took the electric clipper and turned to the tall man behind him. Luke, that's because you don't get much sleep, Pop. Henry, maybe you could choose a job that lets you go to bed early and get up early, like waiting tables in the restaurant next door. Luke replied with a wry smile. Pop, you know, I really need the job in the nightclub. The restaurant doesn't tip as much as the nightclub does. Connie has been urging me for several days. If I don't pay the rent I owe, she'll kick me out. With a shrug, Henry then agreed. Trust me, knowing Connie, she'll really do it. Luke, I know that. Henry, well, what are you still doing here? That pile of towels in the washing machine won't clean themselves. Luke, on it, Pop. Sitting next to the window, Bobby caught the two men's conversation. He couldn't help but smile and shake his head. You actually had no intentions of lecturing him at all, right? Sitting in the barber's seat, Ryan looked at his partially cut short hair and couldn't help but ask. Was it that obvious? With a surprised expression on his face, Henry turned his head to look in the direction where Luke went and then said, I thought my acting was good. It's so obvious, Henry. Picking up a black pawn and taking off a white pawn from the board, Bobby stroked his beard and added, without raising his head, if you wanted to help Luke, you could have just said it. I know, Luke, Henry said as he stopped the electric clipper and took up the scissors to trim Ryan's hair. He's not someone who easily asks for help. That's why he would rather take on 2-3 jobs than accept a pay raise from me. Bobby, at least he's a good man, isn't he? Henry, yeah, he's a good man. He's more than just a good man. Ryan sat back in his chair and listened to the conversation between Henry and Bobby, and couldn't help but silently say so in his mind. All right, son. Taking off the cloth tied around Ryan's neck, Henry said, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? Ryan. Silently looking at his nearly inch-short hair in front of the mirror, Ryan somehow remembered the scene in the Kung Fu soccer movie where Ah Xing and his eldest brother were performing in the bar and felt the urge to sing Shaolin Kung Fu is wonderful ho ho ye. He went bald but unfortunately didn't get stronger. Pop, it's obvious that that look you're going for doesn't work on Asian heads. Sitting on the sidelines, Shamik noticed Ryan's sleek, comical look and couldn't help but laugh out loud in ridicule. Well, I admit, I did slip up a bit, and the outcome was a little different from what I thought it would be. Son, you might need a hat. How much is? Suppressing the speechlessness in his heart, Ryan stroked his nearly bald head and asked. Son, as I said before, it's free. Pop, that's not fair. Hearing Henry's comment, Shamik, who was on the sidelines getting Chico to cut his hair, started to grumble. Why should a first-timer get a free cut? He's not Michael Jordan. Putting down the scissors in his hand, Chico added from the sidelines. Or Ollie. He's not even a brother. Pop has his reasons. In the face of Shamik's objections, Luke Cage, who had been sweeping the floor in silence, couldn't resist speaking up. Pop always has his own reasons. Luke Cage's comment clearly yanked Shamik's hatred back, repeating the words in a gloomy tone. Shamik turned his head to look at Luke. Seriously, man, what the hell are you doing here? I'm sweeping hair, Shamik. Faced with Shamik's obviously aggressive remark, Luke Cage calmly replied. I also mopped the floor, washed the towels, and wiped that window spotlessly. That's my job, you'll never understand. Shamik, you call this work? Luke, at least I'm trying to make a living. Unlike you, who can't even afford a haircut. Hey guys, don't start. Noticing that the atmosphere was getting fiery, Henry, who was standing on the sidelines, spoke up. However, Ryan noticed that the expression on his face didn't seem nervous, clearly not thinking the situation at hand was that serious. Or perhaps, he had a lot of confidence in one of the two. With a meaningful glance at Henry, he returned his gaze to the situation at hand. Similarly, Ryan didn't think the situation at hand was going to get much worse. Even if, in all seriousness, his presence was actually one of the triggers that ignited the fireworks between the two men. I'm fed up with. Luke's last words clearly became the key to igniting Shamik's anger as he stood up with a furious look on his face and approached Luke Cage with anger. What, Shamik? What have you had enough of? Silently gazing at the current Shamik, Luke asked rhetorically, word for word. Looking at the tall figure in front of him, Shamik's anger receded, and he averted his eyes, decisively choosing to reply from his heart, I've had enough of this life, and I want to change. There's still some hair over there. Shamik's conceding look made the crowd in the barbershop chuckle. All right, son. Smiling and shaking his head, Henry looked back at Ryan beside him. I'm sorry, kid, for letting you see that. I won't accept the money for a haircut. If you have any difficulties in Harlem and need help, you can come to find me. Shamik, Pop, I really need help too. Then my advice to you, Shamik, is to get a job that will support you instead of loafing around. I'm looking for someone. I wonder if you've heard of a place called Villard? Ryan asked. Henry. Villard? Frowning for a moment, Henry turned to Bobby at the window and asked, Bobby, have you ever heard of that place? Bobby. No. Bobby replied dryly from beside the window. Chapter 36. Chapter 36. Overestimation. Sorry, son. Bobby, as an old resident in Harlem, was well informed. Seeing his firm reply, Henry nodded and told Ryan, At least there's no place called Villard in Harlem. Maybe you can look in other districts. Maybe you can look in other neighborhoods. Manhattan is huge, and Harlem is just a small piece of it. After a little reassurance, Henry asked again with some concern, Perhaps, you're looking for Villard because of a friend or relative of yours? Shamik interjected, somewhat gloating. It's obvious, Pop. He's been duped, or this Villard place doesn't exist. Henry, shut up, Shamik. Nobody knows everything. Turning his head and scolding Shamik, Henry consoled Ryan. Don't take Shamik's words to heart. He has always been like that. Despite the words of comfort, Henry actually felt that Ryan must have been lied to. Seeing Henry and the others looking as if they had misunderstood, Ryan felt the need to explain. After all, he wasn't here to look for relatives. He shook his head, looked up at Henry's concerned face and said, No, I'm going to Villard to find the beast, the ultimate king of killers, hiding there. Reputation points from Luke Cage +5. Reputation points from Henry +2. Reputation points from Bobby +2. Reputation points from Shamik +2. Reputation points from Chico +0.01. Pausing his broom, Luke Cage looked up at Pop and faintly shook his head at Pop's questioning gaze. He had never heard of someone called the ultimate king of killers, or the beast, or whatever, either in prison or during the time he was on the run. Even as Luke Cage's gaze swept across Ryan's face, it was uncertain whether the so-called ultimate king of killers, whose name was too high-sounding, was real or not. Perhaps, everything was just the imagination of the Asian kid in front of them. In the barbershop, the crowd looked at each other for a while because of Ryan's sudden words, then Shamik reacted first. Haha, kid, you actually believe such an obvious lie? The beast? The beast sounds cool. It sounds cool. Could be my nickname from now on. Well, I overestimated the reception of the crowd. But come to think of it, although New York, including Hell's Kitchen, already had a handful of superheroes like Daredevil active, there was still a bit of a gap between that and the mass appearance of superheroes in front of the public's eyes like the later Battle of New York. Without the big impact like New York, it was more or less, very difficult to get people, especially the black crowd in the barbershop, to accept a setting like the ultimate king of killers with its obvious oriental touch all of a sudden. Anyway, Ryan was also aware that things weren't going to pan out overnight. So the goal he set out to achieve from the beginning was simply to create the first impression in the minds of the barbershop crowd, and especially in the mind of Luke Cage, while preparing for a long-term plan. Although he had achieved his goal, he should continue acting. In the face of Shamik's teasing words, he deliberately frowned and said, The beast is quite a dangerous existence and is not a name you can joke around with. What? You're not happy about that? Compared with Luke Cage, Ryan was obviously a runt in Shamik's eyes. After hearing his retort, Shamik smiled, got up and looked at the guy half a head shorter than he was. He spoke with a mocking smile at the corners of his lips. You want to do something about it? Naturally, Ryan had nothing to say when confronted with Shamik's actions, looking for a fight. It's not like he's Pop. He didn't need to accommodate the other party. With a little energy in his feet, he intended to throw his leg out and show his opponent just how much he could do. However, just then, a tall figure stepped in between Ryan and Shamik. Luke Cage looked at Shamik, who had an arrogant expression on his face, and spoke in a quiet voice. Shamik, Pop's shot isn't a place you can cause trouble. If you really want a fight, I can always meet up with you in the back alley. Luke, it's none of your business. As long as it's in the barbershop, it's my business. Gritting his teeth, he glared at Luke for a long time. Shamik then turned his head and looked at Ryan, who was blocked behind the tall figure. Boy, you're lucky. Actually, you're the lucky one. Ryan silently stared at Luke Cage's tall back, somewhat speechless. It was clear that everyone in the barbershop was subconsciously treating him as the weaker party in the conflict. But the truth was that Shamik, with his little arms and legs, wouldn't have been able to stop a single kick from Ryan's mighty steel leg. Having been humiliated twice in a row, even if Shamik had thick skin, he wouldn't want to stay in the barbershop any longer. Looking at Shamik slinking back, Henry couldn't help but shake his head. I hope Shamik will understand that fighting is not the only way to solve problems someday. Bobby. This is Harlem, Henry. You know it's not that easy to survive without throwing a punch or two. Henry. I know, Bobby, but I also know that Harlem is slowly changing for the better. Although it's not changing as fast as I thought it would, at least it's changing. After a casual conversation with Bobby, Henry refocused his attention on Ryan. Luke Cage was back to his previous quiet self after resolving the conflict at the barbershop. If he hadn't been aware of his abilities, perhaps Henry would have dismissed him as an ordinary man. Shaking his head, Henry approached Ryan and deliberated. Son, although there's something wrong with the way Shamik spoke earlier, some of the facts may not be wrong. Villard may be a place that doesn't exist. No, Villard exists. Faced with Ryan's unwavering gaze, Henry had a bit of a headache. After a moment's thought, he decided to take a softer approach and let Ryan uncover it for himself. Okay, but son, New York is a big city, and it's not easy to find the Villard you're talking about in such a big city, not to mention, you don't have any money either. Chapter 37. Chapter 37. Harlem's Paradise. At night. Harlem. Harlem's Paradise. Harlem's Paradise, the most famous nightclub in Harlem, was also one of Cornell Stokes's, Cottonmouth's bases. Hey Dante. Shamik. After expertly bumping fists and gesturing, Dante, who worked as a bartender in the nightclub, noticed Shamik's strange scowl and asked, What's the matter, Shamik? You look a little off? Don't mention it. Shamik shook his head. A haze flashed across his face. What had happened in the barbershop, and especially his subsequent behavior in the face of the floor sweeper, was a bit too cowardly. Naturally, he was reluctant to talk about it and embarrass himself. So, taking a look at the atmosphere in the club, Shamik then changed the subject and said, Gimme a cold one. By the way, any nice girls in the club? Shamik, you got any money? Dante subconsciously asked as a bartender, despite being a buddy. Come on, Dante. You know I would never skip the bill on Cottonmouth's turf. Shamik said as he pulled a crumpled bill from his pocket and craned his head to look somewhere on the first floor. Unless I don't want to live. Hey, it's my job, man. You know there are always a few idiots out there. Pouring his drink and pushing it in front of Shamik, Dante spoke somewhat apologetically. Job. Shamik subconsciously recalled his super lame appearance in the barbershop during the day when he heard Dante's reply. His face darkening as he downed most of the drink in front of him before speaking with an irritated expression. Do you think having a job is all that great? Even as a cleaner? Or that yellow runt? I'm destined for greatness. Just like Cottonmouth. At this thought, Shamik could not resist turning his head again, looking toward the second floor of Harlem's Paradise. Shamik, have you heard? At the bar, Dante was polishing the glass in his hand as he said, I saw Martin and the others earlier. It looks like they messed with some guy and got their asses handed to them. Cottonmouth was throwing a fit about it. Martin? Hearing the news, Shamik subconsciously grimaced. He had never gotten along with Martin and the others, especially after they had defected to work under Cottonmouth and Willis, and their arrogant attitude was a constant irritant to Shamik's sensitive and fragile nerves. Finally, some good news. Hearing that Martin and his people had been unlucky, Shamik only felt that his dull mood had finally eased a little. After a sip of his drink, he couldn't help but ask, What happened? Isn't Martin and his crew good fighters? Despite the bad relationship, Shamik had to admit that Martin and his crew were capable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been recruited by Cottonmouth to work under him. All I know is they were injured by one man. I'm not sure about the details. Dante was, after all, only a bartender in a nightclub and had limited access to inside information. One guy? Shamik raised his eyebrows and took another sip of his drink. I'll be right back. Leaving that sentence and gulping down the rest of his drink, Shamik hastily left the bar. How on earth did things get to this? In a Chinese restaurant, Ryan, dressed as a waiter, looked at the guests coming and going with a bewildered look on his face. Obviously, I came to get some reputation points from Luke Cage. So how did I become a waiter in this restaurant? Waiter, tidy up table 5. Coming. Arriving at the table with a rag in hand, Ryan sighed as he cleaned up the mess in the restaurant. Sure enough, cultural differences couldn't be ignored. He thought that he had earned over 10 to 20 reputation points from Madame Gao with the name of the Beast alone. But when he switched to Luke Cage and the others, it couldn't even match the reputation points earned from Madame Gao. Work hard, Ah Xing. At some point, coming up behind Ryan, Connie, the owner of the Chinese restaurant, addressed him and said, Although Henry recommended you, I still won't pay you if you're lazy. Yes, ma'am. I know. Casually agreeing, Ryan looked at Connie, who had turned to leave, and then down at the rag in his hand. The expression on his face was more than a little tearful. Looking at his own appearance at the moment, how could he be related to the mysterious Panglai Island? However, looking up at the nearly 500 reputation points on the data panel, Ryan couldn't bring himself to say he was going to leave. Finding Luke Cage's location took a lot of effort, but to leave in frustration without even getting enough points was clearly not in line with Ryan's original intention. After all, Ryan's original intention was to get the remaining 400 reputation points from Luke Cage for the Black Iron treasure chest. A week at the most. Secretly setting a deadline for himself, Ryan decided to stay in Harlem for a week first. If he really couldn't get enough points, he would think of other ways or go to other districts and try to find other superheroes or villains. Waiter, over here. Coming. After figuring out a plan, Ryan didn't complain anymore and then entered Ah Xing's role completely. Phew. Shamik breathed a long sigh of relief and emerged from the bathroom. Originally, he would have returned to Dante's location. However, after a few steps toward the bar, Shamik subconsciously stopped in his tracks. He turned his head and looked behind him toward the stairs. Up the stairs was Harlem's Paradise's second floor, where Cottonmouth, Cornell Stokes was. Shamik had passed this spot countless times in the past but never had the courage to go up there because of Cottonmouth's reputation. Forget it, I don't want to die yet. Pissing off Cottonmouth is no joke. Shamik stood in front of the stairs for a while and hesitated, eventually making a choice in his heart, just as he had done in the barber shop. After a few steps forward, Shamik glanced back in the direction of the second floor again with some lingering interest. Coincidentally, a familiar face flashed past on the second floor. Martin? Shamik looked at Martin, who appeared on the second floor, and remembered the conversation he had just had with Dante at the bar. He gritted his teeth, changed his direction, and went up the stairs to the second floor. Shit. I ain't a wuss. Chapter 38. Cottonmouth. Gulp. Swallowing a mouth full of saliva, Shamik carefully made his way to the second floor of Harlem's Paradise through the dim lights of the nightclub. Shit, this is the real Harlem's Paradise. This is what I want. Shamik couldn't help but burst out as he raised his nerve to look down at the scene on the first floor from the second floor's balcony. Curbing his excitement, he continued to walk inside. Standing on the second floor, there were several men clearly dressed as bodyguards, causing Shamik to subconsciously raise his heart. Fortunately, he was lucky enough not to attract the attention of the men. Following the corridor on the second floor, Shamik arrived at a place that was obviously an office. Martin, whom he had seen before, was inside. I don't like to beat around the bush, so tell me, what happened? Standing in front of a huge poster of Notorious B.I.G., Cornell looked at Martin and the others, who were wrapped in bandages in front of him, and asked with interest. We met a man who... Ah! Reaching out to interrupt Martin's explanation, Cornell turned his head to look at the eye-catching crown on the Notorious B.I.G. poster behind him. I don't need to hear excuses or explanations. I pay you to work for me, not to listen to you whine like a bitch in front of me. It was an Asian guy, wearing a red sweatshirt and a pair of shabby sneakers. Cornell subconsciously raised an eyebrow and looked at the well-built Martin. So, a single guy beat you and your men? He was strong. He sent me flying with a single kick. Cornell sat back in his chair and was silent for half a second before saying, A kick? We found a rat. At this moment, the door of the office was opened. A bodyguard came in, dragging Shamik. Martin. Shamik? Cornell. You know him? Martin. No, we're not close. Nodding and withdrawing his eyes, Cornell looked at Shamik and slightly leaned forward. So, tell me boy, what are you doing in front of my office? I'm just looking around, really. I'm Dante's friend. I'm on your side. Faced with Cornell's meaningful gaze, Shamik gulped. Boy, unfortunately, all I can say is, there are some places in this world that you can't just look around. Such as my place. Reaching out to the bodyguard standing behind Shamik, Cornell redirected his gaze back to Martin and the others. Wait. I know who that Asian guy is. I saw him today. Anticipating what might happen to him next, Shamik quickly struggled and shouted from the hands of the bodyguard. Stop. Raising his hand to stop the bodyguard, Cornell redirected his eyes to Shamik. Tell me, who is he? There's a small room on the third floor of the restaurant. It's originally a storage room, but you can use it as your bedroom for now. Late at night, as the Chinese restaurant was closing, Mrs. Connie talked to Ryan, who was finishing up in the dining room. Also, stay indoors as much as possible at night. Harlem isn't very safe, especially late at night. A lot of homeless and jobless people like to wander the streets and would mug people like you. With a stern face, Mrs. Connie advised Ryan with a few words. Living abroad on your own isn't easy. Although I don't know why you came to America since you're here, work hard, and at the very least, survive. Although the salary from the restaurant isn't much, it can at least guarantee your 3 meals a day, and you won't go hungry. Thank you. Although Ryan wasn't going to work that long in the Chinese restaurant, the kindness Mrs. Connie showed him made him feel a little warm. Bang! However, the warm moment didn't last long. Soon, there was a knock on the door, and several black thugs, armed with baseball bats, broke in. I'm sorry, we're... Seeing a couple of guys barging in, Ryan was about to say something when he was pulled back by Mrs. Connie, who was standing beside him. What's the matter? In the kitchen, the male owner of the Chinese restaurant, a middle-aged Chinese man with the same dark hair and yellow skin, came out. Crash. A bat shattered the ceramic jars placed inside the store. A black man, who was obviously the leader, looked at the 3 people inside the Chinese restaurant and asked in a disdainful tone, "How long have you been in this country? Can you even speak English?" "There's nothing wrong with my English." Facing the aggressive thugs, the man shielded his wife behind him and answered back. "So, tell Cornell Stokes and Maria Dillard that you're going to donate money to build a new Harlem. Do that, and we'll leave." To the side, Ryan had grasped the situation. It was obvious that these thugs who broke in were here to collect money. It seems that the public security wasn't so good in Harlem, similar to Hell's Kitchen. Faced with the threat from the thugs, the owner of the Chinese restaurant, though afraid, firmly refused. "This restaurant is mine. My father worked hard to buy this building. Tell Cornell Stokes and Maria Dillard that I won't donate to them. We didn't vote for Maria Dillard to let her do this kind of thing." "Looks like you haven't figured it out yet, old man." Hearing the owner's refusal, the thugs changed expressions for a few moments. The leader raised his baseball bat and aimed it at the elder couple, saying words for words, "I'm not ageist, so why don't you just give me the money while I'm still talking nicely?" I think they've made that clear enough. Having been watching from the sidelines, it was definitely Ryan's time to make an appearance. "Ah Shing!" Hearing Ryan open his mouth, Mrs. Connie, who was standing aside, hastily shouted, trying to stop him. But, apparently, a few of the thugs had noticed Ryan on the sidelines. "What did you say?" Coming closer and closer, one of the black men rested his baseball bat on his shoulder and faced Ryan. "Try saying that again." "I said they think they..." After silently looking at the baseball bat behind the black man's head, Ryan still replied with a straight face. Before Ryan finished repeating his words, the black man standing in front of him suddenly changed his expression and waved the baseball bat behind him toward Ryan. Chapter 39. Chapter 39. Employment. Bang. Confronted with brutality close at hand, Mrs. Connie subconsciously turned away, grabbed her husband's sleeve and tightened her fingers. She closed her eyes and couldn't bear to see the bloody scene coming. However, after a few seconds, Mrs. Connie opened her eyes. The scene before her was quite different from what she thought. Someone was injured, but the injured person wasn't Ryan, as she expected. Instead, it was the black man, the one who made the first move. In the Chinese restaurant, Ryan was still standing there, with one of his legs up in the air. On the wall, the black man with the baseball bat was slowly sliding down from the wall. "Boy, you're messing with the wrong person." Seeing their friend over by the wall, the one that Ryan kicked away, the remaining men looked at each other. Their leader raised his baseball bat and viciously swung at Ryan. Crack. Ryan flicked his leg and directly kicked the oncoming bat, followed by a change of stance and kicked the man out of the Chinese restaurant. To the side, witnessing Ryan easily solve his friends with a couple of moves, another black man hastily pulled out his gun and pointed it at him. However, before he pulled the trigger, Ryan's foot slammed down. Mighty Steel Leg's powerful force left a shallow crack on the floor of the Chinese restaurant. In the next instant, the guy dashed in front of the man who raised the gun and side-kicked the gun in his hand, smashing it into pieces. Ryan kept his foot moving and kicked the black man out into the streets. After getting rid of the thugs, Ryan slowly set his foot down. He turned to look at the only thug left in the restaurant. The surviving man looked down at his fallen friends, looked up at Ryan, and decisively admitted defeat. Frantically waving his hands around, he walked back out the door while saying, "I have nothing to do with it, I only came 'cause they asked me to. I don't even like these guys, man. Who on earth are you? Where did it come from?" When Mrs. Connie came back to her senses, she looked around the restaurant and asked Ryan, "My name is Ah Xing, from Penglai Island." Reputation points from Connie Lin +5. Reputation points from Jean Lin +5. Sure enough, Chinese people understood the significance of Penglai better. Shocked for a moment, Jean Lin, the male owner of the Chinese restaurant, seemed to think of something and quickly opened the restaurant's cash register to take out a thick wad of bills from it and hand it to Ryan. "Here you are." "What?" Ryan bowed his head and looked at the money given to him. He couldn't help but feel stunned. "I know these people. They won't give up so easily and will definitely come back for you. Take this money and leave Harlem as soon as possible." Jean Lin did this not only because he was concerned for Ryan, but also because he was actually worried that more people would come after his Chinese restaurant because of this. In the end, the couple were just ordinary people who opened a restaurant to make a living and didn't want to get involved in the fight between Ryan and the thugs. Such an approach might be somewhat selfish, but it was something that couldn't be helped. "I see." The attitude of the restaurant's owner, Jean Lin, was actually very clear, and Ryan wasn't angry about it. Because, to put it another way, if he were an ordinary person facing such a situation, it's actually quite possible that he would have chosen the same kind of approach, more or less, and backed away from trouble. Fortunately, he wasn't an ordinary person like Jean Lin, who was defenseless and could only accept it. Nodding, Ryan pushed away the bills in front of him. "I'll go, but I won't take this money. If I take this money, then what's the difference between the previous gang of thugs and me?" Taking off his uniform and putting it on the table, Ryan nodded to the two people inside the Chinese restaurant. He then turned around and walked towards the door of the Chinese restaurant. Not working in a Chinese restaurant actually had very little impact on him. After all, Ryan didn't come to Harlem to work. "Wait." Mrs. Connie glanced down at Ryan's folded uniform and then at his departing back. After a few seconds of hesitation with a struggle on her face, she quickly called out to Ryan, who was already at the entrance of the store. "You don't need to leave, Ah Xing." Reaching out and patting her husband's arm, Mrs. Connie looked at Ryan's surprised expression. "We are going to hire you to protect the safety of our restaurant." Harlem's Paradise. The second floor. In the office. "In the barber shop?" Cornell slightly frowned at the name Shamik gave, feeling a slight twinge of uncertainty. He used to work under Henry when he was young and was taken care of by him, so he had a lot of respect for his former boss. Even though the guy was no longer ruthless after he got out of prison, he still maintained his respect. He respected his request, allowing the barbershop exist as a neutral zone in Harlem. "Are you sure he's in the barbershop?" "No doubt about it." Shamik hastily nodded. He would never lie to Cottonmouth, the Asian guy in the red sweatshirt. "I saw him in the shop, getting a haircut. I went to the barbershop this morning, and I even had a little argument with Pop about it." Oh. Hearing that, Cornell sat in his chair and remained silent for a while. Then he slowly said, "Since things involve Pop." However, before Cornell could finish speaking, the door of the room was pushed open. "Willis, haven't you ever learned even a little something called manners? Can't you see I'm talking to someone right now?" Cornell frowned at Diamondback, Willis Striker, who barged in with a displeased look on his face. "That guy showed up again." Ignoring the accusations, Willis glanced at Martin in the office and Shamik on his knees. He then addressed Cornell, who was sitting in his chair. "The man in the red sweatshirt. He attacked a group of our men, who were collecting donations." "It's him again." Cornell still had respect for Pop, but that didn't mean he could accept people undermining him over and over again. "Where was it this time?" Cornell asked while suppressing his anger. "At the Chinese couple's restaurant." Hearing that the incident wasn't at the barbershop, Cornell's eyebrows furrowed. He stood up and approached Diamondback. "I want to see that guy by tomorrow, dead or alive. Make him understand Harlem's rules." Chapter 40. Chapter 40. Change. Reputation points from Cornell Stokes plus 25. Sitting in the small room converted from a storage room, Ryan raised an eyebrow as he looked at the content that suddenly appeared on the data panel. The name Cornell Stokes was somewhat unfamiliar. It was obviously not a well-known character in the Marvel world, but the system displayed a lot of reputation points, even more than the reputation figures he earned from Luke Cage, so Ryan was a little confused for a while. Anyway, no matter what, getting points was a good thing. After sitting on the bed and pondering from side to side for a while, Ryan then gave up on this apparently pointless approach. The room converted from a storage room wasn't very big. While barely able to accommodate a bed, it was even more cramped now. But Ryan wasn't too picky. While the moonlight shined in, Ryan lay on the bed, and it didn't take long for him to fall asleep. The system's cards gave Ryan extraordinary capabilities, but they didn't give him the ability to stay awake indefinitely. Besides, he wasn't a superhero like Daredevil or the Punisher, who fought criminals without hesitation. No need to sacrifice his sleep to defend the safety of New York City. The next day, as the chaotic night in Harlem passed, the sunlight crept up, sweeping all evil into the shadows. Looking at the pedestrians coming and going on the road alone, Harlem seemed no different from any area in New York, provided, of course, that the apparently broken glass of the Chinese restaurant was ignored. The thugs who caused trouble last night were dealt with by Ryan, but the damage they left behind in the Chinese restaurant didn't disappear so quickly. Especially in front of the store. The huge floor-to-ceiling window that had a big hole in it was Ryan's masterpiece. Last night, he kicked the thugs out of the restaurant, showing great strength, and at the same time, added some unnecessary problems for the Chinese restaurant. Such a large piece of glass was a hassle to replace, so the Chinese restaurant didn't open in the morning. They needed to deal with the damage left by the thugs in the restaurant last night. Ryan also relaxed and went to the barber shop located near the restaurant. The purpose, naturally, was still for Luke Cage. Hey, Ah Xing, good morning. Good morning. In the barber shop, Henry saw Ryan walking into the store and then nodded and greeted him. How's it going? How are you getting used to working in Connie's restaurant? It's okay. If he ignored the second part of the day, where he had to reveal his powers. From his performance in the first part of the day in the restaurant, Ryan thought he did quite well. He was quick, responsive, hardworking, and didn't complain. He was a good employee. At least Mrs. Connie was satisfied with my work and promoted me. Ryan didn't lie about that. He did get a promotion. Last night, he promised Mrs. Connie and changed from a part-time worker to an employee of the Chinese restaurant, specifically to protect the restaurant from the neighborhood thugs. Promoted? Looking at Ryan with some surprise, Henry took in his serious expression, and it really didn't look like the kid was lying. Looks like you did quite well. Did he really do that well? In just one night? Henry couldn't help feeling curious. By the way, why isn't the restaurant open today? After briefly chatting about Ryan's first day working at the restaurant and harvesting a full load of questions, Henry then asked. Because last night, a few thugs came to the restaurant and damaged a lot of things. They're still cleaning it up. Ryan explained why the restaurant wasn't open today, completely ignoring the fact that a large part of the damage was actually caused by him. No, his legs. Ryan's reply made Luke, who was cleaning the windows, and Henry subconsciously stop their movements. After a few seconds of silence, Henry shrugged his shoulders at Ryan and made a helpless expression. Welcome to the real Harlem, son. Even though Pop tried to maintain the rules in the barbershop, trying to lead the children in the store to the right path, he still couldn't change the fact that Harlem was chaotic. In Harlem, everyone has a gun. No one has a father. By the window, the silent Luke Cage spoke up and provided the most accurate description of Harlem. If that's the case, why don't you step up and change things around here? Change? Faced with Ryan's question, Luke Cage helplessly shook his head. He collected the rag in his hand and put it away, turning to look at Ryan behind him. Do you know Harlem's past, chaos and poverty? Every day, countless people die on the streets of Harlem. Countless wives lose their husbands, and children lose their fathers. Chico's father died that way. Harlem's history is like that, and there hasn't been much change. The new councilwoman, Mariah Dillard, took office, but she herself is Cottonmouth's shield, and it was Cottonmouth's men who destroyed the Chinese restaurant. So, Harlem never changes. It only sinks deeper. That's the reality. Change doesn't just happen. You're a foreigner who's only been in Harlem for a day, and can't even pronounce Harlem that well yet. Luke Cage seemed to have a lot to say about Harlem but didn't do so. Although I'm just an outsider to Harlem, but I know change doesn't just happen out of thin air or by sitting around at home doing nothing. Those thugs influence Harlem with violence, so why can't someone use their own way to stop the violence and make a change? You won't know what will happen if you don't try. If a person doesn't have a dream, would they be any different than a salted fish? After the short pep talk, Luke Cage's expression clearly faltered a little. Standing aside, Henry also subconsciously clenched his fist. Looking at how Luke was stunned, he chose to keep his mouth shut, leaving the choice to the other party. However, Luke quickly collected his emotions and reverted back to his previous silent demeanor. You don't have to lecture me. I'm just an ordinary sweeper around here. He shook his head, lifted the bucket at hand, and planned to go inside. No, you're not. Reaching out and stopping Luke, who wanted to leave, Ryan looked up at the tall figure and firmly said, I can feel it. You're not an ordinary person. You have the power to change this place, stopping Harlem from sinking deeper. Chapter 41. Chapter 41. Proof. Luke Cage had been trying to hide his uniqueness, including working 2 jobs at the same time, not taking part in any dangerous things, not provoking gangs, not doing bad things, and doing everything possible to avoid exposure. However, he didn't expect that the outsider who suddenly came to Harlem and appeared in the barbershop could easily point out his biggest secret. At this moment, Luke Cage's mind kept thinking about a lot of things. He even had some suspicions that Ryan was the one sent to capture him from the private detention center where he had been held before. Who the hell are you? My name is Ah Xing, and I'm from Penglai, a secret island in the east. Reputation points from Luke Cage plus 85. Reputation points from Henry Hunter plus 40. Sure enough, this kind of setting as background had to be thrown out one by one to have an effect. When everything was released all at once, it wouldn't be as shocking. Looking at the considerable points on the data panel, Ryan was slightly distracted, but he quickly gathered his thoughts. After all, he wanted more than reputation points. The East? Penglai? With the somewhat difficult to pronounce name, Luke saw Ryan in a new light. The guy was still in the same red sweatshirt and ridiculous hairstyle that Pop had cut. However, they couldn't hide the mysterious aura emanating from his body. I thought I've lived long enough to see everything. Henry shook his head. Seems like there's still a lot to see. Ah Xing, what kind of place is Penglai? Penglai is a legendary immortal island in the East China Sea. We live on Penglai Island, maintaining the principle of seclusion, and rarely appear in front of mortals except under very special circumstances. Since he threw out the background setting, naturally, he had to go even higher. The introduction, the style. So, even though Ryan was the only person from Penglai for now, he still acted mysterious, as he explained to Luke and Pop with conviction. Very special circumstances? Luke Cage keenly noticed the content of Ryan's words, thinking of what he said yesterday in the barbershop. His heart rippled. The story you told us yesterday, was all that true? There really is a beast? Thinking of what Ryan called that person earlier, Luke couldn't help but frown. The ultimate king of killers. The name sounded ominous. Of course, did you think I was lying? With a thumbs up for Luke in his heart, Ryan looked surprised on the surface. In the barbershop, Luke and Pop looked at each other. Compared with believing the so-called beast that popped up out of nowhere, it was easier to believe that it was all a lie. Ah Xing, it's not that I don't believe you. It's just that this Penglai thing is hard to believe, and the beast is... it's kind of... Henry didn't finish his words, but the meaning was quite obvious. Although he had seen a lot of extraordinary things from Luke, skin that couldn't be cut by a blade and superhuman strength, things that were undoubtedly powerful. However, these abilities were less significant compared to what Ryan had said. In the face of Henry's doubtful attitude, Ryan naturally understood. After all, in the absence of sufficient evidence, the perfect setup was just empty words. Nodding his head, Ryan glanced at the barbershop and then settled on the vending machine in the corner. Although it's not much evidence, but... Harlem's paradise. The nightclub during the day, without the exquisite colors of the nightlights, had a violent shady atmosphere. Diamondback, Willis Striker was standing on the dance floor on the first floor, looking at the men gathered in front of him. Then, he turned his head and gestured some to the thugs behind him. Nodding, one of the thugs turned around and pulled a bruised and battered figure from the corner. Staggering out, Shamik spat out some blood from his mouth and opened his swollen eyes to look at the crowd gathered in Harlem's paradise. Clearly, it wasn't a pleasant night for him. Boy, stepping in front of Shamik, Willis reached out and patted his bruised cheek. You should be glad you were lucky enough I didn't feed you to my dogs. So, down the road, if I catch you lying to me in the slightest, I promise I will definitely show you what it feels like to wish for death. Don't worry, everything I said is true. After one night's encounter, Shamik obviously changed. Facing Willis's threat, he answered back with a bloody grin. It's for the best. Pushing the other man's head away, Willis ignored Shamik, who had fallen to the ground, and turned toward his men in front of him, shouting, As we all know, Harlem has always been our kingdom, a paradise that makes white people shudder. However, just yesterday, a little runt challenged our authority and hurt our brothers. So, brothers, for the brand new Harlem. For the brand new Harlem. Let's go. Ah Xing, are you sure you want to show us that legendary Penglai Island, here? In the back alley of the barbershop, Pop looked at Ryan, who was carrying a can of drink with a bland expression, looked around for a moment and asked with a somewhat subtle expression. That's right. Ryan nodded and finished the last sip of the drink in the can in his hand. Penglai is too far away from New York. I can't make it appear in front of your eyes. Turning his head to look at Luke and Henry standing next to him, Ryan seriously explained. As the mysterious Penglai currently existed only in his setup, naturally, Ryan couldn't create it out of thin air, but he still had his own way. Although Penglai couldn't be conjured up, he could indirectly prove the existence of Penglai by his actions. But I can use other methods to prove that everything I say is true. As he spoke, Ryan let go of the can. His right leg took a step back, and then the mighty steel leg kicked with force. With a whistling sound, the kick hit the falling can. That's my proof. Ryan raised his hand and pointed to the cans that cut through the sky and flew off to who knows where and turned his head to Luke and Pop, who was standing behind him. Chapter 42. Chapter 42. Nickname. Reputation points from Luke Cage plus 35. Reputation points from Henry Hunter plus 50. How did you do that? After a while, Pop folded away the stunned expression on his face and looked at Ryan, who looked like it was all natural. Kicking a can was nothing amazing in itself, but being able to kick a can so high up into the sky that no one knew where it went like Ryan was very surprising. Because obviously, this had surpassed the strength of ordinary people. Even if normal people kicked with all their might, it was impossible to kick it that high up into the sky. What's more, looking at Ryan's relaxed appearance, it was obvious that he didn't use his full strength. Luke looked at Ryan's rolled-up pants, revealing his strong thighs. Perhaps because of his own extraordinary abilities, he wasn't as surprised as Pop was by Ryan's powerful legs. However, similarly, Luke was curious about the source of Ryan's powers. He could feel that Ryan's ability wasn't the same as his own ability, that he had accidentally acquired through experimentation. Mighty Steel Leg. It's the name of the kung fu I learned in Peng Lai. Kung fu? Since the 1970s, Chinese martial arts culture has become popular in the United States, so when Ryan said the word kung fu, Luke and Pop didn't find it strange. Instead, they rightfully nodded their heads and felt that all their previous doubts made sense. This is why stereotypes ruin people. Looking at the expressions of the two, Ryan shook his head in his heart while sighing. Chinese kung fu was just too popular in America these days. At the same time and slightly more aware, thanks to the efforts of the predecessors that promoted it, Ryan wouldn't have to explain everything in detail. It was a difficult challenge for Westerners to understand the meaning of the word kung fu. King Kong legs and Power Man, I never thought I would be able to meet two people with superhuman abilities in one day. Pop, please stop calling me that. Luke shook his head helplessly at Pop's nickname for him. Henry, hey, Mr. Bulletproof, if I had your superpowers, the first thing I'd do is give myself a better nickname. If someone used it first, it wouldn't be as fun. Luke Cage, there's never going to be that kind of guy, Pop. Because no one will ever know what I can do. Shaking his head, Pop looked at the tall man in front of him. Never say never, Luke. Maybe Ah Xing is right. You should go out and help others. Maybe that's the real reason why God gave you these superpowers. That's what Reva said. Pop's words clearly reminded Luke of something. Maybe she was right. Don't you ever think about the fact that you could have helped others with these powers? Maybe you should be a little ambitious, Luke, and use your powers to save more people and, as Ah Xing said, change Harlem. Luke Cage. Maybe, my ambition is just to sweep hair in a barbershop, wash dishes in a nightclub and ask people to stop bothering me? You can't escape. At this moment, Ryan, who had been watching, spoke. You can run away for a while, but not for a lifetime. Do you think I wanted all this? Ryan's words obviously struck some memories for Luke. He subconsciously clenched his fist and couldn't help but raise his voice. I was framed, beaten, locked up like a damn fish in a tank for observation. When I got out, I had these strange abilities. Pop, these abilities saved your life. Luke Cage, it ruined my life. I never wanted to have these abilities. Sometimes I even think that if I didn't have these abilities, Reva wouldn't have died. And I wouldn't be hiding like this. Pop. So what, Luke? Listen to me. The past is the past. And the only direction in life that matters is forward. Never backwards. I just want to live an ordinary life now. He shook his head. Pop's words, while touching, clearly hadn't been able to convince Luke to come out of his painful past. Fortunately, my aim is just the points, not to soothe some people's wounds. Otherwise, I'll have to create a bigger role for myself in this scene. Watching the touching scene between the two, Ryan's heart secretly rejoiced. However, at this moment, the sound of something being smashed came from the distance, causing his nerves, which had been slightly relaxed, to tighten up again instantly. Because the direction from which these sounds came from was clearly, it's from Connie's restaurant. Henry turned his head and muttered a guess. Then, he saw Ryan, who was standing beside him, rush straight towards the restaurant with swift movements. Since they promised Mrs. Connie that they would guarantee the safety of the Chinese restaurant, they naturally had to do it. Luke. After a worried glance in the direction Ryan had disappeared, Pop then turned his head to look at Luke, who was still standing beside him. Pop, when I first told you the secret, you promised me that you would never force me to do something I didn't want to do. Luke couldn't help saying so after seeing Pop's gaze. But things are different now. I'm not asking you to do something bad, Luke. In response, Pop didn't waver. You know Connie, she let you rent the place before, without asking about your situation. Pop's words obviously made Luke falter for a moment. He turned his head to look in the direction of the Chinese restaurant, pursed his lips and hesitated, and finally told Pop, I know, but Pop, just this once. I'll only do this one time. Your decision, Pop said as he slightly curled the corners of his lips, and lightly shook his head at Luke. To that, Luke helplessly smiled, pulled up his hoodie and chased after Ryan. Go ahead, Mr. Bulletproof. Show the Harlem crowd what you're made of. Watching Luke leave, Pop stood there and whispered to himself. Chapter 43. Chapter 43. Face to face. With mighty steel legs, strong footwork, Ryan soon arrived at the location of Jean Lin and Connie's Chinese restaurant. A group of gangsters with fierce expressions were clamoring outside the restaurant, surrounding the owners, Jean Lin and Mrs. Connie. Tell me, where is the guy who appeared in your shop earlier? Reaching out to silence the noisy underlings around him, Diamondback Willis approached the couple in front of them and, in his own distinctive accent, asked with an icy expression, as a long-time resident, you should be well aware of our rules. You trash. Harlem is the way it is because of people like you. Facing the menacing crowd, the Chinese restaurant owner Jean Lin gulped, but his words were unexpectedly brave. With a disdainful grin, Willis raised his finger and poked Jean Lin's face, saying, You seem to have forgotten, this is Harlem, old man. This is our kingdom. You yellow-skinned people could survive here only because our brothers allowed you to, not because of how well you were doing. Don't test me. You're being racist. It's not like that. When confronted with Willis's obvious distortion of the truth, the man, Jean Lin, couldn't help but shake with anger as he said, This Chinese restaurant is something that my father has worked hard for all his life. We've always worked hard to make a living in Harlem. We've never committed any crimes, not like you. Racist? Hearing the accusation that was apparently on the verge of becoming a politically correct slogan for black people coming from Jean Lin, Willis collected himself and turned his head to sweep through the crowd around him. Who here would say my words were racist? As a famous figure in Harlem, everyone was afraid of the name Diamondback. Even the few slightly more righteous passers-by who tried to say something were stopped by their friends. Sweeping his eyes from the crowd around him, Willis looked back at the two people in front of him. It seems that no one thinks that I'll say it. However, before Willis could finish his speech, the sound of a punch came from behind him. Willis's expression instantly grimaced as he looked in the direction where the sound came from. He saw a man in a red sweatshirt standing there. That's him, the guy I saw in the barber shop. At the sight of Ryan's sudden appearance, Shamik touched the vague wound on his face and rushed to Willis's side to whisper. Noticing Ryan's gaze, he subconsciously bowed his head and avoided the sight. Looking back from Shamik, Ryan had basically figured out what was going on. However, he had no intention of hiding it anyway. On the contrary, from the standpoint of gaining reputation points, the more people knew about Ashing as a character, the better it would be for Ryan. Therefore, Shamik's disclosure didn't cause him much harm but indirectly helped him. Although, Ryan won't thank you for it. Hearing Shamik identify the guy from his side, Willis subconsciously narrowed his eyes. He remembered what Cornell had explained to him. Leaving the couple in front of the Chinese restaurant, Willis approached Ryan, shaking his head from side to side and looking at him. The group of black people behind him, who had originally surrounded the entrance of the restaurant, also approached Ryan. So, you're the one who took a shot at our people? If you mean that group of people last night, Ryan turned his head and glanced at the crowd behind Willis, ignoring the provocative appearance of these people rubbing their hands and grinning. He said, Yes, I did it. They were doing something illegal and trying to rob innocent people, so naturally, they needed a little lesson. Illegal? Ryan's words fell in the ears of the people around him. As if it was a big joke, they all looked at each other and started to laugh. It was only after he finished laughing that Willis looked Ryan straight in the eye and said, word for word, In Harlem, we are the law, and unfortunately, you've broken our law. So, there's nothing to talk about. What? You wanna beg for mercy now? Unfortunately, I promised Cottonmouth I'd bring your head as a gift. Who's Cottonmouth again? Another name popped up out of nowhere for no apparent reason, causing Ryan to blurt out a question. You haven't even heard of Cornell, and you have the balls to cause trouble in Harlem. Willis looked at Ryan as if he were looking at a dead man. So, the name Cottonmouth from the system yesterday was Cornell Stokes's name. Willis's answer was a good way to help Ryan solve the problem that had been bothering him since last night. I think the one called Cornell Stokes is their boss. Looking at the dazed look on Ryan's face, Willis subconsciously frowned. He hadn't forgotten what had happened to his men earlier. Thinking of what Martin and the others had said, he subconsciously glanced at the tattered sneakers on the guy's feet. He slightly took a few steps back and pulled away from Ryan to a safe distance, leaning his back against the dense crowd behind him, before continuing. Perhaps, you think you're great and could easily beat a few of my men, but can you beat 10, 20, 30, 100? The entire Harlem is ours. You can't run from us. Quit the bullshit. He replied threateningly towards Willis. Ryan moved his arms and legs with an expressionless face. He shook his neck from side to side, shook his hands, and finally opened his arms in a trademark kung fu pose. Come on, all of you. Seeing Ryan, who was clearly alone, boldly making challenging gestures at their group, some hot-tempered men couldn't help themselves. In the midst of the commotion, a burly black man, over 2 meters tall, ignored Willis's orders and walked up to Ryan, looking down at the small man in front of him. The runt didn't even reach his chest. He grinned and raised his huge fist. Wow, a casserole-sized fists. How did you cultivate that? In response, Ryan's expression didn't change too noticeably, even sparing a glance at the burly man's fist with interest. Unfortunately, because of cultural differences, the burly man didn't understand Ryan's words. Ignoring Ryan's teasing, his opponent raised his fist high and slammed it down without hesitation. Chapter 44. Chapter 44. Crisis. Bang. There were no surprises. This time, the man who threw his fist first flew out. Looking at the burly man's huge body flying in midair, not only did it draw a lot of shouts of surprise, but it also knocked down a large number of standing gang members. Looking at his men, who were knocked down like pins in a bowling alley and wailing underneath the burly man, Willis whirled around and gave orders to his men. Everyone, get him. As Willis gave the order, the rest of his people picked up all kinds of weapons and rushed at Ryan. Bang bang. How fast they went up was how fast they were sent flying back. In the face of the surging crowd, Ryan applied his full mighty steel leg power and kicked the men rushing in front of him back again like balls, one by one. Faced with these people who were looking to cause trouble for him, Ryan had no intentions of staying his hand, or should we say foot. Thanks to his mighty steel leg, the lightest man who flew out spat out some blood, and might have some shattered bones in his body. Seeing how the few rash people who had rushed forward all flew backwards one by one, falling to the ground with serious injuries, the rest of the thugs couldn't help but stop themselves from moving forward, gulped and looked at each other with blank faces. Although they liked using violence to solve problems, it didn't mean they liked being beaten up. Especially in the current situation, a kick from Ryan wouldn't just hurt for a few days, but in serious cases, it could even cost them their lives. Willis watched as, one by one, all the men that came with him stopped moving because they were too scared. Willis couldn't help cursing. He grabbed a man who was hiding at the back and slapped him. Fuck! You bastards, go! Who told you to stand down? Shit man, didn't you see that? Even if he was slapped, the other party would rather take the hit than rush forward. We can't beat something like that. Even Shaq can't hold up against him. You idiots! Kicking the lackey to the ground, Willis reached behind him and pulled out a gun. Why hit him when you can use a gun? With a reminder from Willis, the people who had hesitated around Ryan reacted. They threw away their iron bars or baseball bats and took out guns to face Ryan. The weapon on the other side had changed from baseball bats to firearms, and the level of danger Ryan was faced with had increased several times. Thus, at the sight of this scene, Ryan's expression changed, and he subconsciously stopped his foot movements. Although his mighty steel leg was powerful, it was far from being able to kick a bullet. Go ahead, try to kick us. Surrounded by guns, Willis regained his boldness and stepped forward, looking at Ryan with a stony expression on his face. He couldn't help but taunt him. You were so impressive just now, taking care of so many of my men with a few kicks. Come on, you yellow-faced runt. Try to kick me, I'll wait. Ryan wouldn't care too much if only one gun was aimed at him. With mighty steel leg's footwork and ability to dodge, he could have easily dodged the gun. However, after glancing up at the 20 to 30 guns in front of him, even with mighty steel leg, Ryan didn't think he would be able to take out so many people and come out unscathed from so many guns. In the end, he still didn't have enough abilities. As a D-level card, Ah Xing, although good, was still a D-level card. Mighty steel leg was strong enough already, but it wasn't all powerful, as fists and feet were easily restrained by their firearms. If I had a stronger card, I wouldn't be passive when faced with these kinds of situations. Looking down at the reputation points displayed on the system data panel, the previous move behind the barber shop earned Ryan a lot of reputation points, but it was still a bit short of redeeming a new, black iron treasure chest. No, I can't. I can only try to exchange these points for wooden treasure chests. Using 100 points, with the amount of points he had accumulated so far, as long as his luck wasn't too bad, there's always a good chance that he could draw something that would help him get out of this dangerous situation. Although the system had determined that all the items opened from the wooden treasure chest were useless, if used properly, they could have extraordinary effects. If Ryan could, he wouldn't want to see his hard-earned reputation points being used to redeem wooden treasure chests. But in this situation, if he didn't use them, he might never get the chance to use them again. Time waits for no man. If I hesitate any longer, I'll die riddled with holes. Having made up his mind, Ryan immediately spent 100 points to exchange with a wooden treasure chest from the system. Open the treasure chest. So many guns for just one person. Isn't that a bit too much? At this moment, a deep voice sounded. Who are you? Willis looked at the large man who appeared from nowhere in the distance. He then turned the gun in his hand and pointed it at the other man, and spoke with an impatient tone. Mind your own business. This ain't something you want to get involved in. I don't like the tone of your voice. It's disrespectful. You think I won't kill a brother? In the face of the man's response, Willis burst out laughing in anger. He smiled and glanced at the large man, then cruelly smiled and pulled the trigger. Sorry, but you're wrong. After the shot, Willis turned around and stopped paying attention to the nosy passerby. He's still alive. However, the men standing next to him noticed the situation and shouted at Willis. What? Hearing the warning, Willis quickly turned around and saw the large man, who had appeared out of nowhere, still standing there. His shot didn't even wound him. Chapter 45. Chapter 45. Working together. What the fuck? If before, Willis was barely able to explain the abilities Ryan had shown earlier. Then, blocking bullets with one's body was obviously beyond what normal people could do. What kind of monster are you? Willis asked with a shaky tone as he looked at the unharmed man. A Harlem citizen who can't stand your work. Under the rim of his hood, the corners of Luke's mouth slightly curled upwards as he replied in a deep voice. Item. I kill you 3000. Effect. Attack. Introduction. The ultimate Swiss Army knife, where a total of 10 deadly weapons are combined into one. Each weapon could be used independently. A weapon that was said to be 10 times more powerful than any other weapon. Remarks. Giant knife, bicycle chain, poison, gunpowder, gun, grenade, pesticide. Are you scared yet? E-level card. The Black Organization. Skill. Concealment. Background. A mysterious criminal syndicate shrouded in mystery in Detective Conan, which will always appear to others as a dark humanoid figure unless its true identity is revealed. Remarks. Impossible. Your true identity is actually? Ryan looked down at the item in the system treasure chest and looked up at the surrounded Luke Cage. He was speechless. If you had arrived earlier, I wouldn't have had to exchange the 100 points at all. This was even more obvious when he saw the item that was there. I kill you 3000. Of course, this complaint was just Ryan's complaint about superheroes always appearing at critical moments. But the fact that Luke Cage appeared was certainly a big help to him, and at the very least, those remaining points in the system didn't have to be touched. He still felt a little heartbroken about the fact that he had just spent 100 points to open a wooden treasure chest. Impossible. I don't believe it. There really is someone who can stop bullets. Willis shook his head. Even if he saw it with his own eyes, he still couldn't fully believe that someone could actually deflect a flying bullet with their own body. Looking at Luke, who was getting closer and closer to him, he subconsciously stepped back. Flustered, he raised the gun in his hands and fired several shots. Bang! Bang! Bang bang! Facing the flying bullets, Luke blinked without dodging. He just stood straight and faced these oncoming attacks. A few seconds later, with a few dull thuds, one by one, deformed and squashed bullets fell to the ground. On Luke, there were no other marks except the bullet holes in his clothes and the thick smell of gunpowder. I kinda liked this shirt. Looking down at the holes in the clothes, Luke spoke with a bit of regret. Shit, I quit. When I was asked to come, you guys didn't say anything about fighting these monsters at all. We can't even kill him with bullets. We can't fight him. Someone raised their hands and threw the gun in his hands to the ground. Luke's invulnerability was obviously a huge blow to their confidence. Bang! Willis shot and killed the man who tried to run away. The situation was clearly beyond his expectations, whether it was Ryan or Luke who popped up after him. The only thing he could do was to silence his flustered men. His red eyes swept over the crowd, and he spoke in a grim tone. You guys try to run again, see what would happen. Willis's brutal approach caused the face under Luke's hood to subconsciously frown. Anyone who can kill these two will be Cottonmouth's trusted man from now on. You'll be paid handsomely. The carrot and the stick approach made the men, who were retreating, pause. Getting the reassurance from Willis made these men breathe heavily and ignore the corpse that had fallen to the ground. Wasn't the payment Willis promised the reason they joined the gang in the first place? Fuck. I'll do it. Just this one thing, and I'll be fucking rich. Ryan silently looked at the black man standing there, getting ready to attack. His expression was somewhat subtle. In fact, since Luke appeared, Ryan was basically sure what the outcome of the battle would be. His invulnerability might be somewhat dwarfed in the future against alien technology. But against these thugs in front of him, it was a sure thing. Faced with the fierce attack, Luke didn't dodge. He only raised his hands and shielded his eyes. Against the onslaught of bullets, he rushed forward step by step. He slightly lifted his hand and threw the shooter in the air. In addition to his invulnerable skin, he also had superior strength. Otherwise, Pop wouldn't use the nickname Power Man to tease him. Luke attracted most of the firepower, which naturally reduced the pressure on Ryan. Taking advantage of the gap when people's attention was distracted, he slightly gathered his strength in his feet. He charged straight into the crowd, sweeping the mighty steel leg across a large area of the crowd. There's only a few left. Should I do it, or should you? A few minutes later, the originally aggressive crowd littered the entrance of the restaurant. Ryan and Luke looked at Willis, the only one still standing in the middle, and politely discussed who would take the last shot. Luke glanced down at his tattered clothes and shook his head. You'd better do it. I'll go upstairs and change my clothes. It didn't matter much to Ryan. It was only a matter of sending someone off with a flying kick. Watching Luke go upstairs, Ryan approached Willis. I admit, you're really good, but... Bang. This time, without giving Willis a chance to ramble on and speak again, a direct kick silenced him. Reputation points from Diamondback plus 50. What's with the monologue? You think you're making a movie? Muttering to himself, Ryan found that in Harlem, which was famous for being a black neighborhood, the heroes and villains were equally mouthy. The only single silent person here was Luke Cage. So, what's next for you? Changing into a new shirt, Luke approached Ryan and asked, Do you know where Harlem's paradise is? In response, Ryan didn't answer but instead asked Luke another question. Chapter 46. Chapter 46. Card Fragments. Reputation points from Cornell Stokes plus 110. Reputation points from Mariah Dillard plus 40. At the end of the day, Cottonmouth was just an ordinary person. Even if he had control of Harlem's many criminal activities thanks to his cousin Mariah, who was a councilwoman, it still didn't change the fact that he was vulnerable. Especially after losing Willis and many other men who did his bidding. It was clear that Cottonmouth, Cornell Stokes, could no longer pose much of a threat to Ryan and could be easily dealt with in a few kicks. Ah Shing, are you sure you don't want to stay in Harlem? At the entrance of the restaurant, Mrs. Connie and others looked reluctant. Ryan's appearance, especially his attack on Cornell and the others, had led to a noticeable improvement in security in Harlem. I'm willing to pay extra to keep hiring you to protect us, as long as you stay. I'm not protecting you because of money. Ryan shook his head in response to Mrs. Connie's offer to stay. With the last 2 reputation points harvested from Harlem's paradise, Ryan's purpose for coming to Harlem had essentially been accomplished, and it was time to leave. After all, even if he continued to stay, Harlem had no other targets besides Luke that could help Ryan collect points. Ah Shing, although we've only been getting along for a few days. Pop hugged Ryan and patted him on the shoulder. Thank you for all you've done for Harlem. I'm just doing what I can, and I'm sure that even after I'm gone, there will still be people who will continue to watch over Harlem. So, Mrs. Connie, you don't need to worry too much. While saying that, Ryan's eyes subconsciously looked at Luke to the side, who responded with a helpless smile. So, Ah Shing, what are you going to do next? Standing between the two, Pop's gaze flicked back and forth between Ryan and Luke. He shook his head. It looks like it's gonna be a while before Power Man shows up again. The next step, of course, is to continue my search for Villard, which, after all, is the real purpose of my visit to New York. Blinking, Ryan replied with a straight face. Oh Ryan, I haven't seen you in a while. At the door of the antique shop, Jack looked at Ryan, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, and greeted him with surprise. I thought you weren't going to come back. Why would I do that? It's just a short trip out of town. Shaking his head, Ryan answered with a smile. You got a new haircut? Yeah, how does it look? You want the truth? To be honest, it isn't that great. Haha, I think so too. After a simple chat with Jack in the laundry shop, Ryan walked towards his antique shop. As Jack said, he hadn't been here for a while. Although it wasn't too long, a thin layer of dust had accumulated on the items in the antique shop. So, inside the antique shop, Ryan took a rag and wiped the dust that had fallen on the antique merchandise while he cast his eyes over the system's data panel. On the panel, the 1,000 points were silently tempting Ryan, constantly urging him to exchange them for a treasure chest. Barely able to suppress the impatient thoughts inside, the antique shop was cleaned up. Ryan touched his hair, which grew a little bit, and whispered to the system, "I sacrificed my hair for reputation points, so this has to be a good one." After a few obvious self-encouraging words, Ryan used up his precious 1,000 reputation points to redeem another black iron treasure chest from the system. Looking at his hard work these days, the reputation points that he had painstakingly saved instantly returned to a single digit. Even though his heart was ready, Ryan still had some uncontrollable pain in his chest. Covering his heart, Ryan forced himself not to look at the tiny reputation points in the system and instead set his eyes on the new treasure chest he had just redeemed. Being unsure of his own luck, Ryan spent a bit of time praying, and then he nodded to the treasure chest in the system in an uneasy mood. Open! With a familiar flash of white light, the black iron treasure chest, worth 1,000 points, was instantly unpacked. Sea-level card fragments ×2. Effect. Assembling. Introduction. Unknown sea-level card fragment. Collect 5 fragments to synthesize a brand new card. D-level card. Ip Man. Skill. Wing Chun. Background. A martial artist who loves martial arts and a grandmaster of the martial art Wing Chun. He enjoys sparring with other masters of various schools of martial arts. After defeating a boxer, he became even more beloved by the people of Foshan and was called the #1 martial artist in Foshan. Remarks. I'll fight 10 people. Looking at the results that came out of the system's chest, Ryan subconsciously raised an eyebrow. He didn't expect to draw a character card like Ip Man, which clearly had martial arts as its main theme, at a time like this. Well, the truth was, no matter what kind of card was drawn, Ryan didn't have a clue what he would get. Although it's the same martial artist type of card, it's clear that there were some differences between Ip Man and the Xing Ryan drew earlier. It's not only the difference in style of martial arts, but the boldness of Mighty Steel Leg and the techniques in Wing Chun coincidentally made it clear that these were two vastly different martial arts disciplines. On the contrary, it was enough to make an appearance as a follow-up to Peng Lai's figures. With a background as big as Peng Lai thrown in, it still seemed a little too flimsy to keep running back and forth with the Xing character on, and the presence of the Ip Man card would do a good job of complementing it. It's just that. He wondered, how do I make Ip Man's character reasonably show up? After a moment of vexation, Ryan redirected his attention to another item that had been revealed by the system's treasure chest. Sea-level card fragments ×2. Looking at the description of the sea-level card fragment underneath the item, Ryan then took out the sea-level card fragment from the system that he had gotten from opening previous chests. One of these sea-level card fragments was obtained from the black iron treasure chest, initially drawn together with Phantom Thief Kid, while the other two were obtained from drawing Xing outside the factory back then. In the system's data panel, with Ryan's actions, the sea-level card fragment X2 that had been gray turned into a shiny sea-level card fragment X5. The word synthesize, which had never existed before, also appeared at the bottom of the introduction data. Chapter 47. Chapter 47. The first sea-level card. Sure enough. Seeing the word synthesize displayed by the system. Even though he was expecting it, Ryan's breathing, which had been steady, subconsciously grew a little rapid. After all, this was a sea-level card, which theoretically needed 10,000 points to exchange for a bronze treasure chest and draw from it. He wondered, I don't know how different a sea-level card and a D-level card is, exactly? According to Ryan's analysis, if graded according to abilities, E-level cards are obviously cards of ordinary people. Even if there were occasional character cards with special abilities like Baby or the Black Organization, just drawn before, most of them were ordinary characters without any magical abilities. From the D-level cards upwards, it gradually changed into characters with certain extraordinary abilities. Whether it was the first Phantom Thief Kid, the ones that Ryan drew one after another like Xing, or the latest card, Ip Man, he had just drawn out. However, compared with E-level cards, the abilities of these character cards had obviously grown a lot, and are even capable of defeating 10 to even dozens of people at a time. However, it was clear that when faced with some of the more dangerous situations, the abilities of the D-level card alone were somewhat overshadowed. For example, the situation Ryan encountered in Harlem before. If it weren't for Luke Cage's appearance later on, Even if he could successfully tide over the difficulties, it wouldn't be as easy as it was now. Therefore, it had always been Ryan's goal to strive for more points and draw even more powerful cards. After all, as someone who knew the Marvel world, he knew exactly what to expect. It wouldn't be long before New York became the center of a worldwide, no, it should be said, universe-wide battlefield. If he didn't want to turn to dust at the snap of the fingers, naturally, he needed to work a little harder. Regarding the speculation about C-level cards, from the past experience with the differences between E and D-level cards, the characters should be even more powerful and should at least be able to deal with gunfire threats with ease. Simply put, firearms should no longer be an issue for C-level card characters. What's the point of thinking about it? There's a ready-made C-class card waiting for me right now. Shaking his head, he shook off the thoughts rattling around in his head. Ryan turned his attention back to the system in front of him. With a tap on Synthesize, at the bottom of the introductory data, a white light flashed in the column of the C-level card fragments X5 in the system. Then, a brand new card with bronze luster appeared in front of Ryan's eyes. C-level card, Mizuki. Skills: Chakra, 3 body techniques, broken cursed seal. Background: Mizuki is a villainous character in Naruto and its spin-offs. He was originally a ninja in the Konoha village, from the land of fire. He was a mean, cunning and jealous man who used Naruto to steal the scroll of seals and also told Naruto that the Nine Tails was sealed inside him. In the end, he was defeated by Naruto's multiple shadow clone technique. Later, Mizuki defected to Orochimaru and ended up being a discarded pawn of Orochimaru. Remarks: Jokes aside, I can kill a brat like you with one punch. Ah. Mizuki? The character that barely appeared in 3 episodes of Naruto. To be honest, it's obviously impossible for Ryan to say he wasn't disappointed that his first C-level card only resulted in a character like Mizuki, who was clearly cannon fodder. However, disappointment was a disappointment. At this point, the card had been synthesized, and it was useless for him to say anything else. Therefore, to overcome his disappointment, Ryan focused his attention on the card in front of him. In any case, since Mizuki can be defined as a C-level card by the system, there must be a reason for it. The first thing Ryan felt when he switched to the Mizuki card was the constant flow of chakra energy in his body. Apparently, chakra was also a type of passive skill like Wesley Gibson's adrenaline acceleration skill. However, feeling the amount of chakra running through his body, Ryan had neither the feeling of explosive strength nor an illusion of overwhelming power. Sure enough, a cannon fodder was cannon fodder. Even the level of his chakra is average, right? Shaking his head, Ryan speculated that even as a C-level card, Mizuki was clearly in the lesser category of C-levels. Putting aside his study of chakra, Ryan then turned his attention to Mizuki's 2 remaining skills, the 3 body techniques, and broken cursed seal. The 3 body techniques was one of the most iconic and widespread jutsu in Naruto. They were also a compulsory part of the Konoha Ninja School graduation exam and were used throughout the entire series. Mizuki, as one of the teachers in ninja school, was naturally proficient in these 3 ninja skills. Transformation technique. If the requirements of Naruto were followed, the jutsu would have to be activated by a seal gesture, but apparently, the system skipped that step, turning the 3 body techniques into a skill-like existence. With a thought spinning in Ryan's mind, a bang was heard, and Tony Stark's figure appeared in the middle of the antique shop. This was much easier than Phantom Thief Kid's disguise and makeup. Looking through the mirror in front of the antique shop cabinet at the familiar mustached face that appeared on it, Ryan raised an eyebrow and then grinned at the mirror. He almost thought Tony Stark was right in front of him if he didn't know full well that he was currently using his transformation technique. After the transformation technique was removed, Ryan tried the effects of the 2 jutsu techniques, the clone technique and the body replacement technique. Overall, the 3 body techniques worked even better than he thought it would. Mizuki was rated as a C-level character card by the system, so obviously, the 3 body techniques played a significant role in it. However, feeling the amount of chakra in his body that had been reduced by a third, Ryan was still a bit speechless. Mizuki's total amount of chakra was a bit too small, worthy of his status as cannon fodder. After a silent curse, Ryan then set his eyes on Mizuki's last skill, namely the cursed seal. Ryan didn't know much about Naruto but knew that the cursed seal on Mizuki was supposedly from an ability granted by Orochimaru. Needless to say, if the 3 body techniques was the basis for the system to rate Mizuki as a C-level character, the broken curse seal was the key to raising his evaluation. It was only the word broken that puzzled Ryan. He speculated that it was perhaps because the curse power that Orochimaru had implanted on Mizuki in Naruto was an experimental one, hence the description of broken in the curse. However, no matter what, Ryan was quite curious about the power of the seal. Chapter 48. Chapter 48. Trying it out. In the antique shop, Ryan gritted his teeth to end the use of the broken cursed seal. As the black seal that had spread out from his body gradually retreated into his arm, Ryan felt the cold, evil intent gradually recede from his body and subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief, feeling somewhat uneasy. The power that the broken cursed seal brought to the table was undoubtedly powerful. Ryan could feel the significant increase in both speed and power as the curse seal's power spread through his body. Judging from that, Ryan's punch, along with the curse seal's power boost, was as strong as his previous full power strike with Mighty Steel Leg, not to mention the change in speed. Just looking down at the black seal symbols on his arm, Ryan's expression was somewhat helpless. At this point, he finally understood why the word broken was added to the evaluation of the system. Not only because of Mizuki's role in the process of obtaining the seal itself, but also the side effect of this power. It could only be called broken. It seems that the power of this broken cursed seal must only be used as a last resort. Thinking of the cold, evil feeling that had accompanied his use of the seal's power, Ryan immediately relegated the ability to a reserve position that he wouldn't easily use. It's best never to use this ability. With his back to the system, Ryan didn't feel the need to hold on to power with a huge side effect like the curse seal, and a more suitable card would naturally come along when the points were enough anyway. Inside the antique shop. Once the chakra in his body had recovered, Ryan then used the 3 body techniques skill to create a clone in the shop. The clone that appeared and Ryan looked at each other and gently nodded. This feeling, no matter how many times he saw it, felt novel. Ryan looked at his identical clone, who appeared in the antique shop, and silently sighed. But he didn't stop there. He then activated the transforming ability from the 3 body techniques, again. Only a bang was heard, and after the white fog had gone away, the clone standing opposite Ryan had changed into Ah Xing's form. Then, I'm going to try and see if what I think can be done can really be done. Looking at the familiar face in a red sweatshirt opposite him, Ryan subconsciously took a deep breath. He then turned his eyes back to the data panel of the system, opened the cards in the card column, and found D-level card, 5th brother Ah Xing. For the next step, Ryan didn't use Ah Xing's card to swap out the Mizuki character card he had on him, as he had done in the past. Instead, he aimed this card directly at the clone who had turned into Ah Xing's form in front of him, and ordered the clone to use it. As the order fell, Ryan subconsciously held his breath. His eyes were unblinking as he stared at the D-level card in the system. The idea of using clones in combination with cards also came to Ryan earlier after trying out Mizuki's ability. To be honest, he had no idea whether this approach would work or not. After all, a clone wasn't a shadow clone. It was theoretically a projection that disappeared when touched. No, it disappeared automatically without being touched. If Ryan succeeded, he wouldn't have to risk his life by running around to get reputation points like he did when he went to Harlem to look for Luke Cage. Not to mention that both Pang Lai and the Brotherhood, as he called them, would have other new characters. With Ryan holding it together in disguise alone, it was only a matter of time before there would be a flaw or even someone seeing through it. After all, an organization where only one character appeared at a time, from head to toe, was a huge breach in itself. Failure would leave Ryan to continue to work a little harder and continue to collect points on his own. Fortunately, the expected failure didn't happen. With Ryan's order, the Ah Xing character card in the system started to flash with a faint light. After flickering for a few seconds, it then turned into a white light and entered the body of the clone in front of him. It worked! The thought flashed subconsciously through his mind. Ryan then saw the clone across the room blink at him. This was followed by a feeling of sudden confusion in his mind, as if a part of his brain had suddenly split, and his senses were suddenly multiplied. It was a strange feeling, completely different from when he had used the 3 body techniques clone before, but Ryan could still feel that he could control the clone in front of him. He manipulated his movements, gave orders, and could even disable the clone with a single thought. Shaking his head, feeling the stirring sensations in his head return, Ryan looked towards Ah Xing, who was across from him. Without waiting for him to say anything, Ah Xing nodded with an understanding look. Don't worry, leave it to me. In the antique shop, Ryan watched Ah Xing's back as he pushed his way out the door. There was a brief moment of silence before he withdrew himself, feeling the amount of chakra in his body and feeling that he could still conjure up another clone. Sir. Tony Stark's mansion. Basement. What's wrong, Jarvis? Didn't I tell you not to disturb me while I'm working? At the sudden voice of the aide, butler Tony Stark stopped what he was doing, subconsciously raised his eyebrows and looked up to ask. I know, sir. But the phantom thief has reappeared. Throwing away the unknown part he was holding, Tony then raised his hand and swiped away the virtual design of what looked like a weapon in front of him. Show me where Phantom Thief is. What's he up to? And all relevant information. Yes, sir. At Tony's command, Jarvis presented all the information about the Phantom Thief's activities on the virtual screen in front of him. This included the time of the crime, the process, and, most importantly, the contents of the newest letter. Notice, riding on the blessing of carnations, the gentleman steals the hope of the dead and the blue diamond of bad luck in one moment. Phantom Thief Kid. Tony looked at the content of the letter displayed on the virtual screen for a few seconds in silence and then suddenly said, Jarvis, do a search for news reports on the Ocean Star for me. Yes, sir. A few seconds later, on the screen, all the reports on the Ocean Star from the modern era appeared one after another. With a wave of his finger, he deleted some of the reports that were too old. And finally, Tony's eyes settled on a report from 2 months ago. Daily Bugle. The most precious blue diamond ever created, Hope, will be exhibited in the New York Museum in early May. Well, Mr. Thief. I found you. Looking at the report on the screen, Tony subconsciously curled the corners of his lips. However, before the smile could spread, Jarvis spoke up and doused it with cold water. Although you have done a remarkable job of deciphering the contents of Phantom Thief's letter, sir, I regret to inform you that Phantom Thief's case is over, and the NYPD has already received the diamond that Phantom Thief stole 1 hour ago. This subsequent follow-up from Jarvis caused the confident expression on Tony's face to collapse. Jarvis. Yes, sir. Shut up. Yes, sir. Chapter 49. Chapter 49. The Hand. Phnom Penh, Cambodia. A man with glowing golden hands punched the opponent in front of him. He turned to the wounded man. My name is Danny. I am looking for the hands people. I think you are the one I am looking for. Go home, Iron Fist. Grabbing the arm of a man named Danny, the injured man struggled and replied. How did you know who I was? Danny was clearly surprised when the other man told him who he was and couldn't resist asking. Only the people of Kuanluan know. Your fight isn't here. He didn't answer Danny's question. The blood that continued to flow from the wound on his chest stained the clothes on his body bright red. The wounded man struggled to catch his breath and said, New York, the answers to everything you want are there. Having said that, the wounded man seemed to lose his last breath and subsequently inclined his head. New York. Looking at the dead figure in front of him, silently Danny stood up, mumbling the familiar yet strangely unfamiliar name. Pa. At night, back home. Turning on the light, Claire saw Daredevil sitting on the sofa in the living room and suddenly got a fright. Then she noticed the other person had wounds all over his body. You're injured again, Matt. Claire took off her coat, and taking out the simple first aid kit from the cabinet in the room, she asked him. You've been injured far more often lately, more than you have in the past, Matt. What's going on? It's not safe for you to know too much, Claire. Shaking his head, Daredevil clearly didn't feel like dragging Claire into his own perils too much. This time, I'm not dealing with ordinary enemies. They're very organized and would do anything imaginable. But I'm already involved, right? While dealing with Daredevil's wound, Claire said, I've been in danger since the day I found you in the garbage bin. Will you at least tell me exactly what I'm dealing with? Claire's words silenced Daredevil. After a long while, he said, the organization I'm facing this time is the Hand. They're more powerful and difficult to deal with than any enemies I've encountered in the past. Each time they appear, they're more difficult to deal with than the one before. I'm a little worried that I won't be able to fight them off for too long, Claire. If I lose in a fight next time or the next time, perhaps the entire Hell's Kitchen will be in unthinkable danger. Claire was a little taken aback by Daredevil's comment. It was the first time she had seen Matt act so helpless. Isn't there any other way? Dealing with the wound on Daredevil's body, Claire asked. Maybe just call the police and tell them everything. It's no use. The Hand's operations are usually very secretive. They're also very dangerous, and giving information to the police would only make things worse. Maybe you can consider looking for some people to help you, team up to fight the Hand, rather than going at it alone, with no one to rely on. Team up? Claire's words made Daredevil subconsciously tilt his head. That's right. Claire expressed her thoughts carefully. Since the Hand is so dangerous and powerful, you need to find partners who can join you in the fight. For example, that Xing from Peng Lai you mentioned earlier. He'd be perfect. If you can find him, that is. Xing. Hearing Claire's words, Daredevil recalled the previous encounter in Madame Gao's factory. Reputation points from Sydney +5. Reputation points from George Stacy +20. In the antique shop, Ryan looked at the contents displayed on the data panel and couldn't help but slightly smirk. There was no mistaking it. The card Ryan chose for his second clone was the first D-level character card in his hand that had also helped him earn a lot of points, Phantom Thief Kid. Phantom Thief Kid's ability wasn't as aggressive as Ah Xing. However, when he thought about the points, Phantom Thief had a significantly easier time earning reputation points. It was a godsend. Especially when he didn't need to do it himself. Making use of the Phantom Thief Kid's ability to keep active in New York would undoubtedly make Ryan's plan go smoothly. In the past, he would still have been careful not to be too flashy because of concerns about the practicality of his situation, and in order not to reveal his actual identity. Then, finding a way to collect points using the 3 body techniques skill combined with the cards certainly saved Ryan from that worry. The strength of the clones that had been incorporated into the system's cards was no longer as fragile as the original clones, which were destroyed as soon as they were damaged. They were also considerably more flexible to manipulate, sometimes requiring only a simple command from Ryan. The clones would then respond reasonably well to the card's characters. This kind of change was completely unexpected for Ryan when he first fused the cards through the use of his clones. In a word, it was a good thing. In addition, since the activation and release of the clones were completely controlled by Ryan, it meant that if the clones were in a situation they couldn't handle, Ryan could retrieve the cards by releasing the technique. There was absolutely no risk of exposure as long as he himself didn't die. Reputation points from Tony Stark plus 65. The big fish followed along. Noticing the prompt appearing on the data panel, the smile on Ryan's face turned even more brilliant. Kingpin, long time no see. Kingpin's building, Manhattan. With a cordial greeting, a familiar figure appeared in the middle of the top floor office. Madam Gao, I thought you wouldn't appear again. Seeing the shaky figure, Kingpin couldn't help but raise an eyebrow and casually respond. That's because I've mulled over the path I should take next. Really? Then should I congratulate you, madam? Shaking her head, Madam Gao looked at Kingpin's massive figure sitting in the chair. I've been away for a while, but I've heard a bit about it. I've heard that you haven't been doing so well lately. Maybe you need a little help. No, I don't. Rejecting Madam Gao's olive branch without hesitation, Kingpin stood up from his position. His huge figure cast a huge shadow that completely covered Madam Gao's thin body. I will solve these problems myself, one by one. Will you? Then I wish you good luck, Kingpin. Madam Gao wasn't deterred by the imposing demeanor Kingpin displayed. Still shaking her head with an old and faltering look, she walked out the door on her own cane, seemingly moving slowly. In the next second, she had vanished from Kingpin's office. Chapter 50. Chapter 50. Case. Stumbling out of the elevator with a bottle. Kilgrave's reappearance made Jessica's already messed up life even worse. She used alcohol to numb herself and tried to forget the bad memories. Ms. Jones? Staggering to the door of her apartment/office, Jessica dizzily pulled the key out of her pocket to open the door, but couldn't get the key to align smoothly with the keyhole. Shit! Cursing loudly, Jessica was just about to use some other means when she heard a slightly puzzling question from behind her. Turning around, she saw a haggard woman standing behind her. My name is Michelle. I need your help. Seeing Jessica turn around, the woman spoke up in a hurry. Do I look like I can help people right now? Facing the woman's request, Jessica bitterly smiled and then turned back. Tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow? No, you'd better stop looking for me. I don't even know when I'll wake up. But I'm running out of options. Jessica's refusal visibly dimmed the woman's already troubled expression a little more. She stood her ground and made a last-ditch effort. My husband, John, is missing and hasn't been home for a week. It's not like him. Haven't you thought of calling the police? Although she had decided not to take the case, the woman's words made Jessica subconsciously stop herself and ask. They're free. No, I know my husband. He's always had a regular routine. He goes to work at 8:30 a.m. and leaves at 6:30 a.m. every day. He never misses it. Jessica. Is he a bit mysterious and sometimes nervous? Yes. Exactly. Hearing Jessica's speculation, the woman instantly nodded her head with excitement. However, Jessica's following words suddenly disappointed her. That's because he cheated on you, ma'am. I'm sorry to break it to you, but that could be the case. Ms. Jones, you don't know my husband. But I know about this kind of thing. After all, I'm a professional when it comes to investigating affairs. Shaking her head, the woman looked disappointed at Jessica's reply but managed to force a smile. I'm sorry I've disturbed you, Ms. Jones. Perhaps, you're not the one I'm looking for. I'm sorry to hear that. As she looked at the woman's disappointed back, Jessica scratched her hair for some reason. Looking at the door in front of her, which she still couldn't open. She then pulled the entire handle out with a single tug. Shit. It's all shit. Walking into the office and casually tossing the handle in her hand onto the counter, Jessica angrily cursed. She wasn't even sure if she was talking about her life or the unpleasant conversation she had earlier. Ring. Ring. Just then, the phone in the office rang. Glancing at the phone on her desk, Jessica decided to ignore it. Whoever you are, you have the wrong number. After a couple of rings, the call was automatically transferred to voicemail. Jessica Jones. Do yourself a favor and put away your curiosity. Don't look for John or... Jessica, don't you have a normal job? In the antique shop, Ryan looked at Jessica, who had shown up drunk early in the morning. He couldn't help but frown and ask, I'm working now. After taking a sip of her drink, Jessica turned to look around the antique shop. Her eyes shifted to the new counter in front of her, causing her to raise a thin eyebrow. You got a new one. Care to guess why? Hearing Jessica's words, Ryan replied in a somewhat unhappy tone. The other party attracted Kilgrave to his shop earlier and caused a lot of damage to the antique shop. Although none of the items was valuable, it still took Ryan a lot of effort to sort them out. I'm sorry. I haven't been able to control my temper. The words came out of her mouth, but Jessica's expression was not the least bit apologetic. Although she was young, she was unexpectedly grouchy. So, why are you here this time? With a reputation points dispenser like Jessica at his doorstep, Ryan wasn't going to refuse. However, when he thought of the purple man behind her, his expression turned a little unpleasant. As things stand, Purple Man's ability was still a threat to Ryan. After all, the ability to manipulate people at will was just a little too unsolvable. Perhaps the power of the broken cursed seal could stand up to Purple Man's ability. Thinking about how he had felt when he had used the curse seal earlier, the cold, evil aura seemed similar to Purple Man's ability. It was something that controlled a person's consciousness, and Ryan had a slight suspicion. I was going to get cash, but I searched the flat and couldn't find anything of value. At this moment, Jessica's slightly hoarse voice interrupted Ryan's thought about Purple Man. I recently took a case. No, I think it was a case I wasn't planning to take. But afterwards, a phone call came to my office. Someone was using a voice changer, warning me not to take the case for my own safety. So, you're gonna take it. Sometimes Ryan couldn't understand the thinking of some villains. They had to warn people about plans that could be completed quietly or simply reveal themselves, causing problems for themselves. Don't they understand the point of scheming in secret? Maybe it's because they're too arrogant, with their powers, thinking nobody would stop them? Or maybe they are just too bored of being an unknown figure and want an audience? While thinking about it, Ryan turned his head to look at the system data panel, where he got a small prompt of some point gains. Hey, are you listening to me? Across the counter, Jessica made a disgruntled sound. Yeah, go on. With a shrug, Ryan gestured to the other party. Taking a sip of her drink, Jessica continued. Yes, I took it. I didn't like the tone of the call, and following the clues given by the wife, I searched the internet and didn't find anything too useful. On the surface, it just seemed like an ordinary disappearance case, with nothing odd about it. Until, through some past informants' connections, I found a name. The Hand. Have you heard of it? Chapter 51. Chapter 51. Clues. The Hand? Ryan bowed his head and whispered the name. He had some impressions of the Hand. He knew that it was one of Daredevil's main antagonists, with whom the superhero was constantly embroiled and whose members were mostly presented as a group of ninja assassins. However, further details were unknown. Putting down the bottle in her hand, Jessica watched the reaction on Ryan's face with glaring eyes. You should know something, right? Why do you think I would know? Looking up and meeting Jessica's gaze, Ryan's heart panicked. But on the surface, he still looked aloof. Aren't you in that assassin's group? Frowning, Jessica scratched her messy hair, struggling to recall the name. Ryan? It's the Brotherhood. Yeah, the Brotherhood. With a puzzled look on her face, Jessica continued. So I just thought that since you're all part of a mysterious organization, you'd know a little bit about the Hand. This whole reasoning is a little too sloppy. Are you really a private detective? Listening to Jessica's speculation, Ryan was speechless. It's as good as it gets. Shrugging her shoulders, Jessica looked indifferent. I usually deal with relationship cases. Ryan shook his head. Although Jessica's reasoning process was excessively crude, Ryan reluctantly had to accept it in order to maintain his persona as the Brotherhood's point of contact. He first hesitated in a feigned silence to whet Jessica's appetite before he lowered his tone and spoke lightly, under the impatient expression on his opponent's face. I don't know much about the hand either, but judging from what we know in the Brotherhood, we can tell that they're a group of assassins who present themselves as ninjas. There are 5 leaders that represent the 5 fingers of a hand. These 5 leaders are said to have lived for centuries and possess quite incredible powers. How could people live that long? When she heard Ryan's explanation, Jessica showed her disbelief first. After all, it was a bit too unbelievable to say that someone had survived for centuries, so any normal person would have doubts. It's impossible for people to smash a counter in half with one punch, Ryan said with a meaningful glance at Jessica across the counter. Ryan's words silenced Jessica for a moment. After half a minute, Jessica shook the bottle and downed the last sip of the drink before continuing to question Ryan. So, has the Brotherhood been in contact with this mysterious hand? Of course not. The Brotherhood didn't exist before, so how could they come into contact with the hand? While silently muttering in his mind, outwardly, Ryan still had a deep, made-up, no expression and said, there were a few brief encounters when the Brotherhood planned to assassinate one of the 5 leaders of the hand, but they escaped, and the member who assassinated the leader was subjected to several savage attacks by the hand's ninjas. What happened? What happened to the member who was attacked in the end? In the end, after realizing that the assassination had been unsuccessful, the hand decided to abandon the mission, and the Brotherhood decided not to act rashly for the time being, while no one could guarantee success in assassinating the leaders of the hand. Although Ryan's description was simple, Jessica could still imagine the thrilling process. Reputation points from Jessica Jones plus 125. Looking at the data displayed in the system and the Jessica who was successfully fooled, Ryan subconsciously twitched his mouth and kindly reminded her, although the warning on the phone call was a bit harsh, I think you should probably listen to it and don't meddle in this matter any further. After all, people in the hand are ruthless killers. They clearly aren't people you could go up against. I know what to do, I don't need you to tell me. However, when faced with Ryan's kind advice, Jessica replied back with an impatient look on her face. In response, Ryan could only shrug, having done what he needed to do and warned her. It was up to Jessica to decide what she wanted to do. Moreover, with the super strength and flying ability that Jessica possessed, she could attack and retreat. He thought that nothing would happen to her that easily. Having got the clues she wanted, Jessica was ready to leave. Tisk. Taking a few steps towards the door, Jessica suddenly stopped herself and turned her head with a conflicted look on her face. Kilgrave. I mean Purple Man. Did he show up again? No. At those words, Ryan shook his head. He had also been vigilant about Purple Man, but it was as if the other man had simply disappeared, never to be seen again. Next time you see Purple Man, remember that you should blow his brains out with no hesitation. Harlem. Pop's barber shop. Luke remained silent in his role as the cleaning boy. Hey Power Man, how's everything lately? After sending off the last customer in the barber shop, Pop looked at Luke, who was doing his job in cleaning the shop, and couldn't resist making a teasing remark. Pop, you know I don't like the nicknames. Luke couldn't help but smile bitterly at the other man's amused, snickering expression. Why did I hear that a vigilante has been showing up in Harlem? He's helping innocent people who get caught up with punks and teaching a lot of troublemakers a lesson. You know, since Harlem's Paradise was closed, I lost one of my part-time jobs, so I needed something to do. While not admitting it outright, Luke didn't deny that the vigilante Pop was talking about was him. I've said it before, Luke, always forward. I know, I'll always move forward. Stopping the sweeping motion of his hands, Luke met Pop's gaze and replied, thud. At this time, the door of the barber shop was opened. Sorry, we're closed, if you want a haircut. Hearing the sound of the door opening from behind him, Pop subconsciously spoke up. When he turned to see the appearance of the guy coming in, he stopped talking. It was because, at the front of the barber shop, there was a blind man with a stick. Walking into the barber shop, Matt skillfully dodged the chair on the side, walked towards Pop and Luke, and stopped. He introduced himself with a slight smile. Hello, my name is Matt Murdock. I came to Harlem because I heard that a Chinese man called Ah Xing had been here before. Chapter 52. Chapter 52. Calling the police. Sir, do you know where Villard is? On the streets of New York, Ah Xing, who was in 2 places at once, stopped a kind-looking old man and asked. Sorry, never heard of it. Shaking his head, the old man looked at Ah Xing's untidy appearance. He couldn't help feeling pity and caring. Son, why are you looking for a place called Villard? I'm looking for the legendary ultimate king of killers called the Beast. Reputation point from New York citizen plus 0.01. Ah Xing's reply instantly made the old man curb the concerned look on his face and slightly take a few steps backwards to avoid him. Sorry, I can't help you. You should ask someone else. Looking at the old man's hastily departing back, Xing shook his head and then continued his inquiries, following the same steps he had taken before. Compared to Ryan's other clone, Phantom Thief Kid, the Xing clone was somewhat weaker in terms of points gathering, but there was nothing that could be done about it. After all, both of them were vastly different from each other in terms of skills and persona. Forcing Xing to gain points in the same way as Phantom Thief Kid was somewhat of a stretch. So, Ryan's arrangement for his alter ego Xing was not to cast a wide net like Phantom Thief Kid. Ryan's previous experience had taught him that doing good deeds, fighting crime, reaching out to superheroes or villains, and baiting them with a background like Penglai Island, was the right way to collect reputation points for characters like Xing. As for his movements in the streets of New York right now, it was a bit of a diversion while he waited for the other two things to happen. In the near future, Tony's big grin to the camera to indicate his role as Iron Man has taken place. In New York, whether superhero or supercriminal activity, both were still done in secret. So, encountering both things wasn't that easy for the clone. After moving through the streets of New York for a while, the clone didn't encounter any superheroes or criminals he was expecting but drew the attention of the police. Who called the police? Mercedes, Misty Knight, a black female officer who was nearby, arrived at the scene of the call and asked around. "It's me." An old man stretched out his hand, then pointed to an Asian guy wearing a red sweatshirt not far away. "It's that strange guy over there." He kept stopping people and asked for a place called Villard. He stopped me too. When I asked him why he was looking for Villard, he told me it was to find some kind of legendary ultimate king of killers called the Beast. The Beast? Misty raised her eyebrows and glanced at the old man in front of her. The man hastily nodded. "It's true. Look, he's stopping someone else." "What's the matter?" A little later, her partner Raphael Scarf also arrived on the scene. This gentleman called the police and said that the Asian man over there told everyone he was looking for a killer called the Beast. The Beast? Gang-related? Or a prank? I wished it was a prank, but unfortunately, I think it's real. Misty shrugged her shoulders. Recently, Phantom Thief Kid's repeated crimes had messed with her focus, and now she had to deal with trivial reports like this. "Thank you for the report, sir. Leave the rest to us," she said with some helplessness in her tone. Nodding his head, he turned to look at Xing across the street. The old man warned Misty and her partner, "You guys, be careful. I don't think he's an ordinary guy. Don't worry, we got this." Obviously, Misty didn't take the other party's reminder too seriously. She nodded perfunctorily and asked, "Sir, can you tell me your name? We need it for the record." "It's Stanley. Stanley Martin Lieber." "How's it going?" After a brief conversation with Mr. Lieber, Misty asked her partner Rafe. "I asked people passing by. Nothing's wrong. He just stops people and asks them about a place called Villard." Shaking his head, Rafe replied. "Do you know where Villard is?" Raising an eyebrow, Misty asked. "Never heard of it. Maybe it's a small place." Rafe thought for a moment and spoke with uncertainty. "So, there's no problem." "There shouldn't be any. Do we still have to?" Rafe asked in a low voice as he looked at the distant figure. "Go and ask." Looking back, glancing at Mr. Lieber, who was still watching them from a distance, Misty shrugged her shoulders and replied, "Procedure." "Yeah, procedure." Since his partner had said so, Rafe could only follow along with a sigh. Stepping forward and walking up to the clone, Misty smiled kindly at him and said, "Excuse me, sir. NYPD. Could you please answer a few questions for us?" "Is something wrong?" Looking at the two officers who suddenly appeared in front of him, Xing asked back. "I'm not doing anything illegal." "We know, sir. It's just that someone called the police, so we need to make routine inquiries. Can you show us your ID?" Xing. So sorry, AI no speak English." "Don't lie, you just spoke English fluently." The clone's abnormal behavior caused Misty and Rafe, who were facing him, to glance at each other. Misty subconsciously waved her hand back a little and said, "Sir, please take out any valid ID, even a passport is fine." "You're asking me for something I don't have. I'm just a clone, why would I have a passport?" Seeing that the situation was going bad, the Xing clone made a gesture of cooperation and slipped his hands into his pocket. "I understand." Phew. When Xing made a cooperative gesture, both Misty and Rafe subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief and stopped reaching behind their backs for a moment. However, in a moment of relief for the two, Xing suddenly changed the movements he was making. The muscles of his legs tightened. He used the power of the mighty steel leg to step on the ground lightly, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared from sight. Chapter 54. Chapter 53. Rush. Where did he go? Both Misty and Rafe were stunned to see Ah Xing disappear from sight. When they turned to look for him, they saw a red figure running away at a distance. He was over 10 meters away. Reputation points from Mercedes Knight +10. Reputation points from Raphael Scarf +5. Misty reacted quickly. She turned and ran toward the police car. Rafe! Quit standing there. Get in. Okay. Hastily responding, Rafe turned and ran after her, resisting the urge to look back. Hurry up, we have to catch up to him. Hearing his partner's roar, Rafe got back to his senses and nimbly got into the car. As he fastened his seatbelt, he asked, "He's so fast, is that normal?" "I don't know." In the driver's seat, Misty shook her head. Looking at the shrinking red back in the distance, she slammed down on the accelerator. "But we know it's not as simple as we thought it was. TSK, I told them he wasn't an ordinary guy." Looking at the fleeing figure and the police car that went after it, Mr. Lieber shook his head with a helpless look. Cars on 68th Street heading southwest. Assistance needed intercepting a suspect. Copy that. Any details on the suspect's vehicle? Suspect is on foot. Repeat, suspect is on foot. The suspect is said to be an Asian man, wearing a red sweatshirt and blue pants. Oh. Sorry, could you repeat that? You mean they're not in a car or a bike or something? Oh. Yes. Repeat, suspect is on foot. He's fast, be careful. All right, copy that. They're all gonna think I'm crazy. Ending the radio call, Rafe turned his head to Misty, who was driving. If I was the one who took that call, I'd think the same thing. Driving the police car in constant pursuit of the figure in front of them, Misty grimaced. Noticing a sudden obstacle in front of them, she hastily turned the steering wheel to avoid it and quickly pulled the brakes. The whole process was smooth as if she was a veteran driver. Looking back at the situation behind them, Rafe withdrew his gaze and wondered, is he a robot or something? He's actually faster than a car. Although there were a lot of people coming and going, and the traffic caused them to slow down, such a speed wasn't something that normal people could outrun. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. But he's certainly not normal. Misty wasn't as surprised as Rafe because of her previous experience with superhuman cases. However, she couldn't get closer to the other party, which made her feel anxious. She had a feeling that if she could capture the other party, she would definitely discover something unexpected. Misty, this is downtown. It's crowded. Noticing the scowl on Misty's face, Rafe couldn't help but speak up. I already called for backup. He won't get far. Rafe's words slightly calmed Misty's initial impatience. She eased off the accelerator and told her partner, who was sitting beside her, "Sorry, Rafe. I was a bit impatient." "It's fine." Rafe nodded. "Is it because of that Phantom Thief?" Phantom Thief had been unusually active lately, and several consecutive offenses had placed the NYPD under tremendous pressure. Commissioner Stacy's scowl had been hanging on his face for a week. It's not just because of the Phantom Thief thing. While Phantom Thief kids' frequent crimes had left the NYPD, including Misty, on their toes, the female officer was even more concerned that a homicide case in the 3rd District had taken a new turn. There had been another mass suicide in the neighborhood, with a large number of witnesses at the scene, but none of them remembered how it happened. It was as if, at that time, everyone had uniformly lost their memories relating to the suicide case. I don't know if it's just me, but it just feels like being a cop in New York is just getting harder and harder. In the passenger seat, Rafe sighed. When he first became a police officer, his biggest dream was to crack down on crime and catch criminals. And now, he had to go against people like Phantom Thief Kid. Even if it's hard, we still have to do it. Replying in a low voice, the female officer glanced at Ah Xing, who was still running ahead of them, and jerked the steering wheel into a side alley. "We're at the intersection. Waiting for the suspect to show up." At the southwest intersection of 68th Street, a police car stopped in the middle of the road, and the police officer inside picked up his radio and reported in. "Suspect is heading towards you. Make sure you stop him. Don't worry, leave it to us." "Do you believe that? Someone on foot outran a police car?" Hanging up the radio, the officer spoke to his partner, who was sitting beside him, eating a donut. "Who knows? Maybe there really are people who can outrun a car? Didn't you say you believed Bigfoot was real? Why can't this be real?" "Hey, Bigfoot is real. My cousin down in Florida got an authentic picture of the footprint. He even got a collection of the hairs from its body, so..." Yeah. The officer's partner waved his hand. He suddenly saw his talkative partner look stunned. "Behind you." "What?" It's the Asian guy. He's running faster than a car. Hearing his partner shout, the officer in the driver's seat quickly turned his head and looked at the red figure approaching the intersection from a distance. He was startled. Scrambling off the police car, the two men looked at the rapidly approaching figure and subconsciously gulped. They drew their own guns and shouted at him. NYPD. Freeze. Put your hands up and stop running. You're under. However, the running clone didn't give the two officers in the way a chance to finish their warning. With a powerful and heavy stomp, a loud bang was heard. The running figure continued to run while two cops were already behind him. Turning their heads in bewilderment, they looked at the back of the Asian man, then down at the conspicuous footprints on the hood of the car. The two men then looked at each other in silence. Reputation point from an NYPD officer plus 0.05. Reputation point from an NYPD officer plus 0.05. Damn it! It took me a long time to get the precinct to assign us a new car. Chapter 55. Chapter 54. Contact. Do you think we would still get reprimanded if I told the captain a short, fast-running Chinese guy caused this? What do you think? Did you forget how long we had to apply, beg, and plead to get them to assign us this new car? Shit! Looking back at the officers who were left far behind, Xing gradually stopped running. Although there was no such thing as stamina stats here, the clone's actions would consume Ryan's chakra, and Mizuki, as cannon fodder, didn't have much chakra of his own. So, he had to conserve a little. I didn't expect that to happen. In the antique shop, having learned the whole story through his clone, Ryan's expression was somewhat helpless. As a clone, Xing had no such thing as ID papers. And he, himself, had never encountered such a situation when he appeared as Xing. This was reality, not a movie. So the NYPD officers here weren't as inactive as they were in movies, waiting around for the superheroes to come to the rescue. In reality, and especially in the absence of widespread superhuman influence, the NYPD remained an important part of New York security, both in the pursuit of his Phantom Thief clone and in the pursuit of Xing clone at the moment. Cheek. The clone, Xing, had just confirmed the situation when he heard a sharp sound of tires on the ground, accompanied by the pungent smell of burning rubber. A police car came out and stopped in front of him. Misty got out of the car with a gun, aiming it at Xing. NYPD. Don't move. From the other side of the car, Rafe also got out and approached Xing from the other side. They flanked Xing. Left and right, he glanced at the two people surrounding him. On the surface, it looked like Xing had no way out. But in fact, if Ryan is willing, he could let Xing use his mighty steel leg to kick the guns and shatter them into parts. However, in the antique shop, Ryan touched his chin and secretly thought for a moment. Suddenly, somewhat unexpectedly, he told the clone, Xing, to stop resisting. All right, I surrender. Although the clone had obediently made a cooperating gesture, after seeing him run faster than a car, both Misty and Rafe obviously wouldn't take it lightly. Looking at each other silently, under the intense gaze of Misty, Rafe finally took out his handcuffs, walked behind Xing, and cuffed his hands. Phew! Successfully capturing the clone, both Misty and Rafe subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. You guys are a little too tense. I'm cooperating here. You have the right to remain silent. After successfully handcuffing the clone, Rem obviously regained a little confidence. Hearing Xing's nonchalant words, he felt that he was looking down on them. With that, he said, you're under arrest for suspicious activity, refusing to aid a peace or a police officer, and evading arrest. Judging by the damage you did to that car back there, it's resisting arrest now. As he spoke, Rafe searched Xing's body and naturally, found nothing. There's nothing on him, not even an ID. Turning to Misty, he shook his head. Seeing that, Misty frowned. Let's just take him in for questioning first. Well? New York, Police Department, outside the interrogation room. Rafe handed over a cup of coffee to Misty and asked as she walked out. Nothing too important. Shaking her head, the successive questioning made Misty, the interrogator, a little tired. She took a sip of coffee and helplessly said, he has nothing to hide about his identity. It is just that, I've checked, and the Panglai that he keeps talking about is just a mythical place in Chinese mythology, it doesn't exist in reality. Maybe it's just a lie to claim insanity? A means to keep us from sending him back to China. Rafe's explanation made some sense, but Misty couldn't help but feel skeptical when she remembered how fast Xing had been running earlier. Maybe, Panglai really exists. Otherwise, how could we explain how fast he was running? Reputation points from Mercedes Knight plus 15. Glancing at Misty's tired face, Rafe volunteered. Misty, why don't you let me finish the report? Get some rest. Shaking her head, she refused Rafe's kindness. Misty drank the coffee in her cup and immediately said, I'm holding up. Since I can't ask in the usual way, let's try the old trick. Old trick, are you sure? Rafe turned his head to look at Misty and asked. Misty's old trick was the good cop bad cop tactic often used by the NYPD during interrogations, where one cop played the bad guy and intimidated the prisoner, while the other gave him the right amount of warmth as the good guy. Sometimes, under the pressure of the bad guy's intimidation, the prisoner would reveal some clues. So, who's gonna play the good cop and who's the bad cop? Turning his head and glancing at Xing, who was looking like a normal person in the interrogation room, Rafe asked. You can act like the bad guy. I've already been in there. He would know I'm acting. All right. The interrogation room door was opened, and with an obvious slam on the door, Rafe arrived in front of Xing with a stern face. Bang. First, he let go and dropped the interrogation notes in his hands heavily on the desk. Then Rafe looked at Xing and spoke in a threatening tone. Listen, kid, I'm not as easy to fool as Misty, so don't think that the same thing you did with Misty will work on me. As a bad cop, Rafe's acting was impeccable. His movements and the tone of his voice revealed that he had acting skills. Unfortunately, Rafe's move couldn't put any pressure on Xing, the clone, at all. Ryan, who was watching the scene in the antique shop, wouldn't easily expose his shortcomings because of the threat from Rafe. Why did you run away from the cops when we were questioning you earlier? Thinking he had just done enough, Rafe sat down and immediately asked about the previous situation. Because I like running. What? As a long-distance runner, what's wrong with running? It makes sense. You think I'm going to believe this crap from you? Sure enough, cultural differences couldn't be ignored. Looking at Rafe, who was still scowling without any semblance of acceptance, the clone shook his head helplessly and gave up on staying any longer. Call my lawyer. His name is Matt Murdock. Tell him Xing is here with you guys. Earlier, Jessica's visit to the antique shop to ask him about the hand had given Ryan some ideas. This was the reason why he had Xing surrender to Misty and her partner. He didn't know that Matt was looking for him all over Harlem. So, he needed a reason to get into contact with the other party. At this point, what could be a more plausible excuse than being caught by the police and needing the help of a lawyer? As for why he knew Daredevil's real identity, Ryan could just say that Matt was the one who told him when he was out of it after getting seriously injured. That could be the same reason why Ryan brought him to Claire's doorstep and knew that she was a nurse. Chapter 56. Chapter 55. Confirmation. Thank you. Inside the NYPD, Matt nodded sideways and thanked the officer who showed him the way. With a guide stick in one hand, walking without the slightest hindrance despite being blind, he arrived in front of Misty and stopped. Hello, I'm Matt Murdock. You guys called me about Xing, right? Can I have a word with my client? I don't know if you expanded your business to include immigration crimes, Matt. Looking at the lawyer in front of her, Misty couldn't help but speak up. It could be seen that Matt had some kind of connection to her. Matt, based on the information we currently have in the police department, we're sure that he came to this country illegally. But that falls under the jurisdiction of the immigration department, doesn't it? Matt didn't appear to be flustered at Misty's sudden question. He asked a rhetorical question with a slight curve on his lips before saying, the NYPD isn't in charge of this. Besides, you didn't have a warrant when you arrested Xing, which means this is a false arrest. Matt, if I wanted to, I could inform the immigration department to deport your client right now. Matt was silent for half a second before he said, What do you want to know, Misty? Everything, Matt. Mercedes looked directly at the blind lawyer in front of her. Before we caught your client, he was running faster than a car. I need the truth. Who is he? I can't give you the truth about who he really is either, Misty. Shaking his head, Matt considered what he knew and said, All I know is that his name is Xing, claims to be from the legendary Penglai Island, and he has mysterious and powerful abilities. While superhuman senses prevented Matt from having to walk with the same difficulty as other blind people, they were not, after all, sight, and he couldn't personally describe Xing's abilities in detail. So, he was telling the truth? Matt's words reminded Misty of the results of the previous interrogation again. Misty? Tilting his head, Matt turned his face to Misty and collected the smile he kept on his face. He seriously said, Hell's Kitchen is under threat. I need Xing's help in this, so please. In the face of Matt's stern request, Misty deeply frowned. She turned and glanced at Xing, who was sitting in the interrogation room. After a long silence, she gritted her teeth and made up her mind. Damn it, Matt, do you have any idea how many reports I'd have to write before I could do that? You were released on bail. Opening the door to the interrogation room, Rafe walked in with a cold expression. Although he didn't know why Misty agreed to let Ah Xing go, however, out of his trust in his partner, he still supported her. Fumbling for the key and opening the handcuffs on Ah Xing's wrists, Rafe bent down to open the cuffs on his feet. No need. Seeing Rafe's bent-over posture, the clone subconsciously spoke up while his legs exerted a slight amount of energy. What? Before Rafe could react, he heard a clank sound. The strong steel handcuffs actually broke into several pieces under the force of his opponent's legs. I can do it myself. Getting rid of the shackles on his body, Ah Xing got up and stretched himself, followed by a few leg stretches. He patted Rafe on the shoulder. I'll be off then. Walking out of the interrogation room, the first thing he saw was Matt standing in the corridor. I didn't expect you to recover this quickly. Looking up and down at the superhero's appearance, Ryan then spoke through his clone. Thank you for that time. Recognizing the meaning of Ryan's words, Matt instantly replied with a smile. If you didn't help me, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I didn't do anything. You did most of it, especially that madam. Maybe we should move the conversation somewhere else? Opening his mouth to interrupt the clone, Matt immediately turned around and said, We need a place to talk about something. Including the reason I'm looking for you. You were looking for me? In the antique shop, Matt's words caused Ryan to raise an eyebrow subconsciously. In connection with Jessica's actions earlier, he had a vague idea in mind. You might know the guy we're gonna meet next. Walking out of the precinct, Matt spoke to Ah Xing, who was walking beside him. Beep beep. Here they come. Noticing the honking coming from behind, Matt immediately turned around. Immediately afterwards, a small, more or less battered blue car was seen driving up. With the windows down, Luke Cage poked his head out. I thought you'd be in there a bit longer. Luke. Controlling the clone and giving a surprised expression, Luke's appearance confirmed something that Ryan had been thinking about for a while ago. Hey Ah Xing. Turning his head and looking at a surprised Ah Xing, Luke greeted him with a nod. Pop said hi. Let's talk somewhere else. Shaking his head, Matt folded up the guide stick he was holding, skillfully pulled the car door open and sat inside. Inside the moving car, Luke concentrated on driving the car through New York's traffic jams while Matt talked to Ah Xing about the unfinished conversation in the precinct. Ah Xing, have you found the Villard where the beast is? No. He shook his head. Rather than not finding it, Ryan didn't even force his clone to look for it too seriously. Jokes aside, the beast and Villard were a big reason why Ah Xing left Panglai and came to New York. If he did find such a place, what was he going to dream up next? Of course, Matt and the others didn't know the main key to this problem. So after hearing that, Matt, who was sitting in the car with the clone, spoke reassuringly. Don't be too anxious, Ah Xing. As long as the beast is really in New York, you'll find him one day. Maybe. Well, I'm not trying to put a damper on your expectations, but maybe. While driving, Luke added, Villard doesn't exist. And the thing about the beast is just a lie. After a fitting silence, Ryan spoke through his clone. Whether it's true or not, I'll know when I find Villard. Peng Lai's blood must not be shed in vain. Chapter 57. Chapter 56. The Defenders. They drove to a remote place. Luke parked the car, glanced back at Matt and Ah Xing in the car, and then opened the car door, leaving room for them to talk. Matt slightly tilted his head. When he heard the noise from the front seat and the footsteps outside the car, he couldn't help sighing. In fact, it wasn't only Ah Xing. He was hoping he could convince Luke to join his team, going against the hand. It's just that Luke's attitude had always been clear and obvious. He didn't want to get too involved. Ah Xing, Madame Gao is back. Shaking his head helplessly, Matt first redirected his attention back to Ah Xing, who was sitting beside him. Madame Gao? Although it was clear in his heart who Madame Gao was, even more so than Matt, who was the one and only daredevil, on the surface, Ryan wore a blank expression and asked. Although he couldn't see the expression on Ah Xing's face, Matt still perceived the emotion he wanted to express from the tone of his words. He immediately reminded him, it's the person we fought in the factory before. Oh, you mean that weird old lady? Nodding with a dazed expression, Ah Xing mercilessly added, to be precise, we didn't actually fight her. I hadn't even raised my leg, and you were slapped away by her. This comment from Ah Xing made Matt go silent for a moment. Recalling the scene in the factory, even now, he could still feel the wound left by Madame Gao on his chest, and it still faintly stung. Well, perhaps I wasn't accurate enough. With a wry smile, Matt restrained his bitter memory and showed a serious expression. Ah Xing, I need your help, just like last time. Is it because of Madame Gao? In connection with what Matt had said earlier, Ryan in the antique shop had already figured out the key to the other party's request. It was nothing more than asking him for help in dealing with Madame Gao.
Yeah.
Sure enough, Matt nodded and said, Madame Gao not only reappeared but also brought over a very dangerous organization, the Hand. Borrowing terrifying powers of the Hand, she's trying to integrate the entire Hell's Kitchen drug trafficking industry. The Hand? They're a terrifying organization that's remained hidden in the dark. I've only recently come across news of this organization and have had a few brief encounters with them. When it came to the Hand, Matt's expression changed slightly. It was clear that those previous encounters weren't simple. The Hand is too powerful. I don't have the confidence to stop them on my own. The successive battles over this period of time didn't only leave dense wounds on Matt's body, but also tested the superhero's willpower constantly, making him feel more and more insignificant and vulnerable when fighting evil on his own. As Claire said, he needed a team to help him fight the threat from the Hand.
Ah Xing, I need your strength.
After everything was said and done, Matt took a deep breath and waited for Ah Xing's final decision. He was even mentally prepared for rejection. Okay. However, without hesitation, Ah Xing immediately gave Matt a positive reply.
Why?
His grip on the guide stick tightened a little. Matt turned to Ah Xing. His tone was a little agitated and a little puzzled. To do what's right. To save lives and help the wounded is the duty of those of us who practice martial arts. Master IP taught me that when I was training in Peng Lai.
Master IP?
Ah Xing's answer was a mix between English and Chinese. Even Matt, as a lawyer, didn't understand all of it. But he still picked up the word master from the other party's words. Got him. In the antique shop, Ryan secretly praised the superhero's perceptiveness by observing Matt's reaction from his clone. Master IP is a martial artist who arrived in Peng Lai by accident. According to his own words, he was originally a martial artist who, tired of fighting and feeling powerless in the war, traveled in disgrace and ended up in Peng Lai. Throwing out a little bit about IP Man's background, Ryan kept it shallow, leaving it to Matt's imagination. Taking Ah Xing's description of Master IP to heart, Matt then returned his focus to the battle that was to come. Although with Ah Xing joining him, he was no longer as powerless as he had been in the past when he fought against the Hand. He was also aware that he and Ah Xing alone wouldn't be enough to destroy the Hand's threat truly. They needed more help. At the moment, the nearest candidate was Luke, standing outside. This big man, who was invulnerable and powerful, was simply made for fighting. Maybe let me try it. Faced with Matt's expression of distress, Ah Xing couldn't help but speak up. From Ryan's point of view, he obviously wanted as many people to move with the clone as possible, so he would then be able to gain more reputation points. Getting out of the car and looking at Luke standing in the distance in silence, Ryan, in the antique shop, couldn't help but pick his eyebrow. He looked like a big guy, but his personality was different from that of the average man, perhaps because of his experiences and memories in prison. The big man very much content, even a little too content. Long time no see, Luke. Going up to him, Ryan made his clone, Ah Xing, greet him. It hasn't been that long, Lu faintly said as he turned to the clone. I heard you started to act since I left Harlem. I did that because of Pop. Because Harlem had something that needed to be protected. It's within my power and within my reach. I prefer that, rather than teaming up with a blind man, fighting against some strange organization. But Luke, didn't you ever think that, if no one stopped the Hand now, sooner or later they will reach Harlem? When that happens, drugs will run rampant in the streets of Harlem. Do you want to see that happen? That's just a guess. Ryan's comment clearly touched on something that Luke had been avoiding internally, not wanting to think about it any further. You really think so? Turning his head and looking directly at Ah Xing for a long time, Luke just sighed and made a compromise in his heart. Fine, I promise to join your... What's your team called? What are we called? Although, in his mind, he already knew the name of the team, Ryan nevertheless conceded the opportunity to Matt, who was standing not far away. Matt stood beside the car. Although there was a little distance between Ah Xing and Luke, his super senses still allowed him to hear Ah Xing's question clearly. With a slight curve on his lips, the blind lawyer nodded his head and said, Defenders. Chapter 58. Chapter 57. The First Battle. Kaboom. Sending the ninja in front of him flying, Luke Cage didn't dodge the sharp blade coming at him. With a dull slash, the ninja sword in the minion's hand broke in two. No wounds appeared on Luke's body, apart from his torn clothes. Dodging a slash sideways, Matt swung his billy clubs, the daredevil's weapon of choice, followed by a sweeping blow that knocked a ninja, who was trying to sneak up behind him, away. Bang, bang. With one kick after another, Mighty Steel Leg's powerful kicks sent the ninjas in front of Ah Xing flying away, making it impossible for the ninjas to surround Ah Xing. Every time a ninja rushed forward, they were knocked back by his powerful Mighty Steel Leg and fell to the ground, temporarily incapacitated. Reputation points from the Hands Ninja +1. Reputation points from the Hands Ninja +2. Reputation points from the Hands Ninja +1. Another blow knocked a ninja in front of Matt to the ground. Matt took a few steps back, moving toward Luke, who was slightly panting. He asked, "Can you still fight?" Luke raised his hand to block an oncoming slash, then smashed his opponent down with one hand. Luke adjusted his breathing and nodded at Matt. "I can still fight."
Ah Xing, what about you?
Hearing Luke's answer, Matt nodded his head and then asked the clone, who was a little further away.
Bang!
Turning around and knocking the ninja in front of him away with a backward leg lift, Ah Xing casually said, "Don't worry, no problems here." As a clone, as long as there was enough chakra, there was no such thing as fatigue.
Then keep fighting.
Shaking off the sweat from his face, Matt's originally tired body suddenly produced the stamina to continue fighting. Gripping the guide stick in his hand, he lifted his leg and charged forward once more in the direction where the Hands ninjas had gathered.
Bang!
This should be it, Midland Circle Financial. Falling from high in the air, Jessica stood firmly on her feet. Raising her head to look up, she muttered to herself. After a period of investigation, she finally found an important clue about the hand. According to the clues she had followed, she found a company named Midland Circle Financial. This place was likely to be the Hands' base. Phew! Standing in front of Midland Circle Financial's office, Jessica took a deep breath. Her mind flashed back to the conversation she had with Ryan in the antique shop earlier. At that time, she didn't take it too seriously because she was drunk, but now she felt a little bit nervous inside while she was sober. "Don't be afraid, Jessica. You can do it." After giving herself a pep talk, Jessica looked down at her hands and felt the superhuman strength they contained before walking into Midland Circle Financial's office. When she walked into Midland Circle Financial, Jessica initially felt that the company was a little less populated than she had imagined. When she walked in just like that, no one came forward to stop her. However, she soon understood why the front hall was so empty. Boom! With a sudden loud noise, a hole suddenly appeared in the wall in front of Jessica, and a guy dressed as a ninja flew out of the hole. Dodging to one side to avoid the flying ninja, Jessica looked down at the person who had fallen to the ground, then looked up at the hole in the wall. On the other side of the hole, the sole of a shoe with a hole in it slowly came down. An Asian man was standing there. Reputation points from Jessica Jones +100. "Who are you?" Seeing Jessica standing at the other end of the hole, the man blurted out a question. "I never thought she'd be there." In the antique shop, Ryan couldn't help sighing when he saw Jessica appearing in Midland Circle. Although she usually looked drunk, he never expected that Jessica was this brilliant. With a few insignificant clues, she managed to find the Hands' base. Although his heart was surprised, however, Ryan didn't show it through the clone. Being in Midland Circle's company building, Ah Xing still made the expression of seeing a stranger for the first time and asked, "Are you also from the Hand?"
No, I'm actually, wait.
"Who are you?" Faced with Ah Xing's questioning, Jessica tried to explain in panic, but then she realized it. "Why should I be the one to explain?"
Be careful.
"Behind you." However, before she could get an answer, she saw the man standing across the hole suddenly shouting at her. "What?" Hearing that, Jessica subconsciously turned her head. She saw a guy dressed as a ninja, wielding a stick, rushing toward her. Faced with this aggressive attack, Jessica involuntarily took a few steps back. Even with superhuman abilities, she still didn't have much combat experience in general and sometimes subconsciously reacted like an ordinary person in the face of danger. However, after a few steps, Jessica realized that she wasn't a little girl without any strength to fight back. She shook her head, gritted her teeth and punched the ninja who was charging at her.
Bang!
Under the effect of superhuman strength, the ninja who rushed over flew back again at an even faster speed. "You should believe I'm not with them now, right?" After knocking out the ninja with one punch, Jessica rubbed her wrist and turned her head to Ah Xing on the other side of the wall. Matt's other hand swung his guide stick and was about to block an attack from another direction, but the expected attack didn't appear.
Ah Xing, who is she?
While busy fighting, Matt didn't notice Jessica. Luke, however, witnessed how she lightly punched a ninja and sent them flying back. Jessica's thin figure, paired with this amazing scene, certainly made people feel shocked.
"I don't know, I ran into her."
Shaking his head, the clone faithfully played his Ah Xing role. "My name's Jessica Jones, private detective." In response, Jessica replied in the gap between her punches. She sent another ninja that was rushing toward her flying off. Do private detectives have super strength these days? Looking at Jessica's fierce fighting style, Luke couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and ask. Chapter 59, MUP. Chapter 58, Talk. The Battle of Midland Circle Financial ended. The four of them found a Chinese restaurant nearby as a temporary base. So, who exactly are you guys? And why are you in Midland Circle fighting ninjas? Jessica raised her slender eyebrows as she surveyed the odd-looking men in front of her, lingering a few moments on the mask on Matt's face in particular. Defenders, a team that joined forces to fight the Hand. Although Luke and Ah Xing helped Matt successfully defeat the Hand's ninjas that were in Midland Circle Financial, repeated battles still left some scars on his body. Matt gasped as he covered the sword wound on his shoulder. Defenders? Sounds like some third-rate gang. As I said before, you should have changed the name. Turning to look at Matt, Luke spoke with a shrug. Ah Xing, no, I think it sounds good. Luke Cage, Ah Xing, are you sure you really know what defenders mean? Ah Xing, I know. You just don't like the title. Just like the nicknames Pop gave you, you don't like them either. Luke Cage, that's because Pop's nicknames aren't that good. Ah Xing, since you have so many ideas, why didn't you mention them when he first named us? Luke Cage, that's because I didn't want to join at all. Ah Xing, then why bring it up now? Luke Cage, that's because the name really isn't great, and it's been tossed around. After watching Ah Xing and Luke bickering with each other with a great interest for a while, Jessica turned and spoke to Matt, who was treating his wounds. It looks like your teammates have a problem with the name Defenders. But at least when it comes to fighting, they're both reliable. After handling the wound on his shoulder, Matt shook his fist to feel the impact of the injury on his movements. He turned his face to Jessica and asked, "What about you? Who are you? I never thought a detective could do what you did." "Maybe I'm special." Grimacing at Matt, Jessica promptly spelt out the reason for her appearance at Midland Circle Financial. "I recently encountered a threat because of a case, and after tracking it down, I found out that it was all related to an organization called The Hand, and followed the leads to Midland Circle Financial. Then I met you guys. You know about The Hand. It's not something a private detective can get access to." Matt frowned and pursued. "I have my ways," Jessica said mysteriously. "Your so-called ways is standing by your side." In the antique shop, Ryan observed the situation in the Chinese restaurant through his clone. Hearing Jessica's words, he couldn't help but silently say so in his mind. "I heard that your recent plan hasn't been going well, Madame Gao." In Midland Circle Financial, looking at the battle traces left by the defenders, a silver-haired old man with a thin figure approached Madame Gao's side and spoke in a hoarse and low voice. "It was my negligence." Madame Gao, leaning on her cane, glanced at Midland Circle Financial and paused at the big hole in the wall. "I thought it was just a couple of small rats that I could solve easily, but it turned out to be a big problem. Time is running out. I can feel the strength maintained in my body gradually fading." The withered old man reminded Madame Gao, who was beside him. "It seems that time has once again caught up with us. Don't worry, my people have found clues about Iron Fist in Cambodia. We still have time." After centuries, Madame Gao hadn't let go of life and death. On the contrary, she was even more reluctant to face the arrival of death. The Hand was originally built for the purpose of continuing immortality for the five of them. "I hope everything goes well." The withered old man nodded, looked at everything in Midland Circle Financial, and said, "If you need, I can step in to take care of these guys for you." "No need." Shaking her head, Madame Gao slowly turned around on her cane and spoke as she walked. "Sometimes, you don't need to get your own hands dirty. I happen to know someone who shares our abhorrence of these troublemakers." "You mean Kingpin? So, what else did your informant tell you?" In the Chinese restaurant, Luke asked Jessica while eating Chinese food that wasn't very authentic. "More than you can imagine. Is this shrimp?" Turning to Luke, Jessica suddenly pointed to a dish coming up in front of her and asked. "No, it should be a pork dish." Next to her, Matt calmly replied. "How do you know that? You can't even see it." Even though it was clear during the previous battle that Matt was extraordinary, Jessica couldn't help feeling surprised when she heard him lightly distinguish the differences between the individual dishes. When your eyes can't see, the ability of the other senses will be amplified to replace sight. "I know. It's an ability that's somewhat similar to the mind's eye in our martial arts." Ah Xing spoke up, trying to remind people that he was still there. "You are all a bunch of weirdos." Looking at the few people in front of her, Jessica couldn't help but say so, followed by a self-deprecating comment, "And so am I." After calming herself down, Jessica started to tell them everything she found out from Ryan. "As far as I know, the Hand is a rather old and evil organization. They have some magical powers. They have been recruiting a lot of people to do something shady in New York. My client's husband went missing because of them. Although, I'm not sure about what shady thing they're up to." Luke Cage: "What kind of magical powers?" Jessica: "Does immortality count?" Jessica's words silenced the two for a moment. Matt, although he had been fighting the Hand since the beginning, was equally unaware that they actually wielded such mysterious and terrifying power. "Immortality? That's impossible." Luke shook his head, having some difficulty accepting it. "It's impossible for humans to block blades with their bodies and kick through a wall." Wait a minute, why did that sound familiar? Jessica's words were somehow familiar to Ryan. Chapter 60, MUP, Chapter 59, Infighting. In the Chinese restaurant, after a short silence, Matt remembered where Ah Xing came from and couldn't help but turn his face in his direction and ask, "Ah Xing, is there any information associated with immortality in Panglai?" "Can I say I don't know?" In the antique store, facing Matt's sudden question, Ryan rubbed his head with some headache. It was clear that he used the impossible remarks before to deal with Jessica, but why did it have to come around and bite him in the ass? As far as Ryan knew, the reason why Madame Gao could live forever seemed to come from the mysterious dragon bones of Kunlun. However, how to link immortality to his Panglai was another question. Looking at how the few people in the restaurant were waiting for his answer, Ryan could only silently sigh. He stiffly controlled the clone to speak. This was his own setting, so he had to accept the consequences. Now that the lofty appearance of Panglai was out there, he couldn't drop the ball this time. "Panglai?" Noticing the puzzled look on Jessica's face, Luke opened his mouth and explained, "Ah Xing comes from a place called Panglai. It's said to be a legendary island in the east, a fairy tale in China." Reputation points from Jessica Jones plus 30. The points from Jessica gave Ryan a little comfort, but he still felt a lot from the three pairs of eyes. "I don't know anything about how the Hand gained immortality, but there is indeed a method to gain immortality through cultivation in Panglai." "Cultivation? Are you saying that the power of immortality can be obtained through some sort of martial arts?" Reputation points from Matt Murdoch plus 95. Reputation points from Jessica Jones plus 60. Reputation points from Luke Cage plus 75. "It's not simple martial arts like you imagine." Shaking his head, Ryan suddenly brightened up as he saw the reputation points gained in the system's data panel. The originally frustrated expression suddenly relaxed, and his thoughts were refreshed. He became even more creative now, but the cultivation of celestial arts. Celestial arts? What's that? Jessica and Luke looked at each other. They felt that there was too much world-turning information today. Not to mention these two, even Matt, a blind lawyer with a small reputation in Hell's Kitchen, felt a little confused. Celestial arts is a supreme magical art that exists in Panglai. People say that it has the power to destroy heaven and earth. It could give the practitioner immortality and the ability to fly to the heavens. About the description of celestial arts, not only Jessica, but Ryan himself, was struggling with his explanation. After all, there was a big gap between the differences in culture. If he wanted Matt and the others to understand the meaning of celestial arts, Ryan could only pick up some easy-to-understand content to explain it. But celestial arts cultivation requires talent, great perseverance, and luck. Not just anyone can practice it. Even in Panglai, only a few, such as the island's master, could succeed in acquiring it. Most people, like me, learn ordinary martial arts to strengthen our bodies. You mean the power you have now is ordinary martial arts? Reputation points from Jessica Jones plus 20. After listening to the clone's description of Panglai and then hearing his description of his ability to send people flying with one kick, Jessica's lips couldn't help but twitch. If this is just about being strong, then I think most of the world's athletes aren't even close to being strong. Maybe it was because Ryan's description of Panglai was too shocking. Matt and the others in the restaurant were speechless for a while. After a moment of silence, after digesting the information about Panglai, Matt remembered his purpose. He issued an invitation to Jessica. "Although we met by accident in Midland Circle, the Hand would think we're working together. Maybe you should really join us to go against them." "Thanks, but I'm not in TERS." Jessica raised an eyebrow at Matt's invitation. She shook her head, and as she was about to decline when a dull voice came from her left. "I disagree." The voice of opposition caused Jessica to pause. She turned her head and saw the guy named Luke Cage shaking his head. "You guys saw what happened just now. That was a real battle, not a game. I don't think a private detective should be in that kind of a fight. Frowning, Jessica spoke with dissatisfaction. First of all, I have no intentions of joining your team from the beginning, and secondly, what makes you think that a private detective can't fight? Although Jessica wasn't that great as a private detective, but so far, she was obviously quite satisfied with their own identity and had no intention of changing jobs. Standing up from his position, Luke took advantage of his huge height to look down at Jessica and spoke with a straight face. I've seen your fighting style. Although I don't know where you got your strength from, you obviously don't have real combat experience. You're just swinging your arms around, hoping to land a hit. I don't think that's a fight. You were lucky enough not to get hurt back there. I don't need you to tell me if I can fight or not. Jessica wasn't someone with a good temper. Hearing Luke's words, she felt even angrier. She frowned, unafraid of the other party's tall reminder. Maybe you want to try getting punched? I'd be happy to give it a try. Facing Jessica's question, Luke casually nodded. Bang! Then, with a dull noise, they saw Luke, who was just standing there a moment ago, flying into another table in the restaurant. I don't hold back. Standing in place, Jessica rubbed her sore fist, which was a bit hurt. She looked at Luke, grinned, and spoke in a cold tone. Clatter. Getting up from the table unscathed, Luke looked at Jessica and shook his head from side to side. Me too.